Chapter 1396. It had to be said that both Fan Yunhua and Jia Yu had a wealth of combat experience and escape instincts. Almost at the same time, Lu Yi made his move as well. He didn't choose to flee. If possible, he'd rather have Fan Yunhua and Jia Yu cooperate with him. Both of them were late-stage Constellation Realm cultivators. With his help, they might be able to put up a fight against Yu Yao. However, this was clearly unrealistic. He didn't trust the two of them, and they wouldn't trust him either. Moreover, taking the initiative at a time like this was far more advantageous than passively fleeing. The Mount Pan saber left its scabbard and slashed at Zhu Yuan. At that moment, the dense darkness in front of them suddenly twisted. Immediately after, two black shadows shot out like two thick ropes, one from the left and one from the right. Fan Yunhua and Jia Yu fled, Lu Yi attacked with his saber, and a black shadow appeared. Everything happened in an instant. Lu Ye's pupils suddenly shrank to the size of a needle tip, and his mind was greatly shaken at this moment. The Mount Pan saber didn't slow down in the slightest as it ruthlessly slashed down. Zhu Yuan's back was still facing him, his expression solemn. Given his strength, he must have sensed Lu Ye's movements. However, he clearly didn't think much of Lu Yi. He only circulated his spiritual energy to protect himself. However, how could the Mount Pan saber, which had been reinforced with divine edge spirit inscriptions, be blocked by simple protective spiritual energy? The saber fell, and his spiritual energy was destroyed. Zhu Yuan sensed that something was wrong, but it was too late to dodge. In his haste, he could only raise his arm to block. The sharp edge of the saber slashed at his upper arm, splitting his flesh and severing his bones. In that instant of deadlock, Lu Ye's brute force erupted. The saber spun like a crescent moon. Blood splattered everywhere, and a severed arm fell to the ground. Pained cries and screams rang out simultaneously. The one crying out in pain was Zhu Yuan. He hadn't expected to lose an arm in a moment of carelessness. The ones crying out in pain were Fan Yunhua and Jia Yu. Lu Yi couldn't see what had happened to them, but he didn't need to see to know that their fates wouldn't be good. He didn't stop at all. After cutting off one of Zhu Yuan's arms, a sky full of blade shadows enveloped him. Zhu Yuanxing's cultivation was at the late stage of the star constellation realm. His strength was extraordinary. If they were to fight one-on-one, Lu Yi would have to expend a lot of effort to take him down. But in the end, he paid the price for his carelessness and underestimation. When Lu Ye's berserk saber momentum was unleashed, he could only parry and had no power to fight back. In just 3 breaths of time, Lu Ye's black saber pierced through Zhu Yuan's chest, directly piercing through his heart. If it was a cultivator below the constellation realm, they would definitely die from such injuries. However, Zhu Yuan had refined the essence of his body to the level of perfect bone marrow essence. Although the injury was serious, it was not fatal for the time being. He stabilized his body, not daring to move rashly. He stared at Lu Yi with eyes full of shock and disbelief. He never thought that a late-stage constellation realm cultivator like him would be able to grasp the gate of life of a mid-stage constellation realm cultivator like Lu Yi. He could clearly feel the spiritual power on Lu Ye's mountain saber. If he made the slightest move, his heart would explode into pieces. If it was a simple stab wound, he could still use his power to heal it. But if his heart exploded, he would definitely die. On the left and right, Fan Yunhua and Jia Yu's screams were endless, as if they were enduring extreme torture. The two black shadows that had emerged from the cave slowly withdrew, as if a giant was retracting its arms. As they withdrew, the screams grew closer and closer. Lu Yi saw the two being dragged into the cave by the black shadows from the corner of his eyes. The deep darkness surged, and the screams disappeared. Along with them, the two people's vitality disappeared. At this moment, Zhu Yuan's expression was complicated. He was still wondering how he had been subdued by Lu Yi. Lu Ye's expression was just as complicated. He had previously thought that the one hidden in the cave was Yu Yao, but when she attacked and her spiritual power leaked out, he realized that his judgment was wrong. The one hidden in the cave wasn't Yu Yao. It was Ri Zhao. No matter how hard he racked his brain, he couldn't figure out why it was Ri Zhao. To Ri Zhao, constellation realm cultivators were like ants on the ground. Why had Zhu Yuan spent so much effort to lure the three of them to Rizhao? Was it purely for fun? That wasn't necessarily the case. The myriad constellation galaxy was filled with constellation realm cultivators. If this guy really wanted to have fun, he could have just gone out for a stroll. It would have been better than causing Zhu Yuan so much trouble. Moreover, the number of Rizhao in the myriad constellation galaxy was limited. Most of them were local powerhouses. Even if Rizhao came as a guest, he wouldn't stay for too long. Oh! An aged voice rang out from the cave, sounding rather surprised. It was undoubtedly because of Lu Ye's reaction and performance earlier. Even if Zhu Yuan had been careless in the beginning, it was still an astonishing matter for a mid-constellation realm cultivator to take him down in a short span of 3 breaths. Lu Yi could clearly feel a powerful divine sense observing him. This made him very uncomfortable. It was as if a venomous snake's tongue was constantly licking him. Under this kind of licking, any of his subtle movements or changes in his expression couldn't escape the other party's inspection. You have a good temperament and are very decisive in your actions. The old voice came from the cave again, as if appreciating him. Then, the voice turned playful. So, what do you plan to do next? Lu Yi lowered his eyes and said indifferently, I'll take him away. When we reach a safe place, I'll let him go. He originally thought that if Yu Yao was in the cave, he would find an opportunity to use the red talisman to kill her. During the early stage of the constellation realm, he had killed Qin Yuandai. Now that he was a mid-stage constellation realm cultivator and had been nourishing in his body for a longer time, the red talisman should be even more powerful. Killing Yu Yao shouldn't be a problem, provided that the other party wasn't too strong, but the other party was Rizhao. This plan wouldn't work. Lu Yi estimated that if he wanted to unleash the full power of the red talisman and reach Rizhao's level, he would have to at least advance to Yu Yao's level. Take the hostage and then talk about the terms. Not a bad idea. The old voice praised lightly. As soon as he finished speaking, a black ray of light shot out from the cave and directly hit the back of Zhu Yuan's head. Zhu Yuan's eyes suddenly dimmed, and his body fell limply to the ground. The mountain pan saber came out of his body, and the clothes around his chest were instantly dyed red with blood. Then, what about now? The voice from the cave became even more playful. Lu Yi lowered his head and looked at Zhu Yuan's corpse, speechless. The hostage was already killed. What was there to talk about? Although he didn't know who was in the cave, judging from the other party's behavior, it was obvious that he wasn't a good person. Zhu Yuan was definitely one of his people. Otherwise, he wouldn't have brought the 3 of them here. However, this old man didn't hesitate to kill his own people. It was clear that he was evil and cruel. Moreover, he was as strong as Rizhao. Even if Zhu Yuan was still alive, Lu Yi estimated that he wouldn't be able to use him as a hostage. Escape wasn't realistic. Fan Yunhua and Jia Yu were examples. With Rizhao watching them from such a distance, there was no way to escape. Lu Yi only hated himself for not being careful enough. If he had been more careful, he would have left imperial equipment outside in advance. Perhaps he would have had a chance to escape. But without knowing Zhu Yuan's destination, even if he had such a thought, where should he leave imperial equipment? Lu Yi waved the mountain pan saber in his hand and looked at the dark cave. He circulated his spiritual energy and brazenly charged in. Since he was going to die without a doubt, he might as well die fighting. It was better than waiting for death. That was a good idea. However, as soon as he rushed into the cave, Lu Yi knew that he had thought too much. The thick darkness around him was like a solid substance. When he fell into it, it was as if he had stepped into a swamp. His body stagnated and even his spiritual energy was suppressed. He couldn't use his divine sense. Not to mention killing the enemy, he couldn't even see what the enemy looked like or where they were hiding. The old voice sounded again. Your courage is commendable. Unfortunately, you overestimated yourself. How about this? Kneel down and kowtow 3 times, and this king will spare your life. In the darkness, Lu Yi gritted his teeth and didn't say a word. He swung his saber continuously, but he couldn't cut anything. The huge gap in strength made people feel especially powerless. As if this action angered the other party, the old voice coldly snorted, "Stubborn. This king wants you to kneel, so you have to kneel. A huge hot pressure suddenly fell from the sky. Lu Ye's body, which could still barely move, suddenly stiffened. It was as if he was suddenly carrying a star on his back. His body couldn't help but tremble. As the pressure increased, his expression became difficult. His eyes widened in anger, and his bones creaked. His face was full of blood, almost dripping blood. The old man was obviously slowly pushing his limits. Lu Yi only felt that his leg bones were about to break. If he forced himself to continue, the only result would be that his leg bones would be broken. However, he still forced himself to hold on. On the Wushuang continent, the deity Ocean from the Chaotian sect in Dingzhou was held hostage by Zhao Tianmu from the Qingli Dao world. If he could face death with equanimity, there was no reason that he couldn't. The cultivators of the 9 states might have all kinds of problems, but many people had a common trait, and that was, they were not afraid of death. This was because those who were afraid of death were almost all dead. Under the immense pressure, Lu Yi was gradually approaching his limit. It was at this moment that he suddenly exerted force in his legs and shot forward like an arrow from a bow. The expected scene of his leg bones breaking did not happen. Because almost at the moment he actively exerted force, the huge pressure on his body suddenly disappeared without a trace. Even the black fog around him was no longer so thick and condensed. In a full attack, he poured all his spiritual power into a saber and slashed it forward. The bright saber light pierced through the darkness and immediately disappeared. Lu Yi felt that his mountain saber was blocked by something. He wanted to pull out his saber, but he couldn't. He could only kick forward. This kick hit something, but Lu Yi didn't know what it was. Ha! Ha! Suddenly, there was laughter in the cave. The laughter was loud and deafening, sounding extremely carefree. Chapter 1397. In the dark cave, loud laughter rang out, and Lu Yi felt his eardrums tremble. The darkness around him receded like the tide amidst the laughter. Gradually, a dim light seeped in, allowing Lu Ye's vision to slowly recover. He finally saw what had blocked his mountain pan saber. It was 2 fingers. They were so light that he couldn't pull his saber away. He also saw clearly what he had kicked. It was the old man's face. At this moment, when the darkness dissipated, he was still in the posture of slashing down with his blade and kicking with his foot. His body was stiff. He did not know what the old man was laughing about. The only thing he knew was that if the old man wanted to kill him, he would have died 100 times over. The big foot blocked his view, so he could not see the old man's full face. However, the blurry outline gave him a strange sense of familiarity. A slight repulsive force came from the blade. Lu Yi took the opportunity to withdraw his blade and took 2 steps back. A slightly aged face with a beard and hair appeared in his field of vision. The old man was sitting upright there and sizing him up with a grin on his face. It was like a lion examining its prey, and it carried an indescribable feeling. Lu Ye's expression became surprised because he recognized the old man. He did not really know the old man, but he had seen him from afar. Nearly 3 months ago, when he and Puku were fishing on Fishing Island, a strong master had caused havoc in the Wanxiang Sea. He had killed a Wanxiang Galaxy's Rizhao on the spot. When he escaped, he passed by Fishing Island. Lu Yi had caught a glimpse of the man's face from afar. No wonder he felt a sense of familiarity. The old man in front of him was the one who had escaped from the Wanxiang Sea. After the incident, the Wanxiang Sea quickly calmed down and there was no movement after that. Although Lu Yi knew that the Wanxiang Galaxy would not let the matter go so easily, a Rizhao-level matter was not something a constellation could investigate. He could only guess that the killer had escaped. Otherwise, the Wanxiang Galaxy would have spread the news. He did not expect the old man to be hiding here. What was certain was that the experts of the Wanxiang Galaxy were searching for this person's whereabouts. The entire galaxy's airspace had probably been turned upside down. As for how this old man had managed to avoid being tracked down, that was obviously his own ability. At the moment, all the powerhouses in the Myriad Phenomenon Galaxy probably thought that the old man had already escaped from the galaxy. Therefore, it would be a clever move for him to stay there. But what Lu Yi didn't understand was, this person was hiding well, so why did he ask Zhu Yuan to bring him here? At this time, he slowly figured out some things. The four of them had come together, and including Zhu Yuan, three of them had been killed. On the contrary, Lu Yi, the one with the lowest cultivation, had not died. If someone were to say that this old man did not have ulterior motives towards him, Lu Yi would not believe it no matter what. But why was it him? Just because of a quick glance on the fishing island? At that time, he didn't notice that the other party was paying attention to him, but the other party's cultivation was high, so it was normal for the other party to notice him when he was observing him. He probably didn't want his life. If he wanted to kill him, he didn't have to go through so much trouble. He also didn't have to risk exposing himself by staying here. It was even more impossible for it to be because Lu Yi saw his appearance. This old man didn't hide his head and tail, so there should be a lot of people who saw his appearance. But in an instant, Lu Yi thought about a lot of things, but he still couldn't figure it out. On the contrary, the old man's words made him instantly feel a little angry. 9 regions cultivators, your bones are still so hard. The old man looked at him with a smile, like an elder sizing up a junior, and there was even a hint of admiration in his eyes. Lu Yi tried hard to control his emotions, not revealing the slightest flaw, and only pretended to be puzzled. What is senior talking about? This junior doesn't understand. You're not from 9 regions? The old man's expression remained unchanged, but even with his eyesight, he couldn't see any unnatural changes in Lu Ye's expression. Lu Yi slowly shook his head. I'm from the Wushuang continent. Even Tang Jun didn't know that he was from 9 regions, so how could Ri, who had only seen him once, know? But Lu Yi knew in his heart that since the other party dared to ask this, he must have seen something. But what flaws could he have that the other party could see? This wasn't a small matter. Back then, Yang Qing had specially warned him not to mention 9 regions when he traveled the starry sky in the future. When she brought him to the reincarnation tree, she even used the name of Jiutian to act. This was because the powerhouses of the previous 9 regions era had provoked too many enemies. Now, even if 10,000 years had passed, hatred was something that was difficult to eliminate once the roots were planted. Especially those powerhouses who had once attacked 9 regions, they were definitely extremely sensitive to the words 9 regions. So Lu Yi wanted to understand how the old man in front of him could determine that he was from 9 regions. Just as he was thinking about how to probe without leaving a trace, the old man smiled slightly. If you're not from 9 regions, why do you have the aura of the Tianji plate on you? Lu Ye's pupils shrank slightly, and he finally figured out where the problem was. So it was the Tianji plate. Every cultivator of 9 regions, even if they were rogue cultivators who didn't belong to any sect, had a battlefield imprint on them. This was because only with a battlefield imprint could one enter the Spirit Stream battlefield and the Cloud River battlefield to search for merits and battle achievements, and to communicate with others easily. For the cultivators of 9 regions, a battlefield imprint was a necessity. And the battlefield imprint was given by Xiaojiu. Xiaojiu was the combination of the spirit of the Tianji plate and the origin of 9 regions. The cultivators of 9 regions who had a battlefield imprint would naturally have the aura of the Tianji plate. According to the information Lu Yi had obtained, when the 9 regions era was besieged by many powerful enemies, the Tianji plate hadn't been born yet. The powerhouses of 9 regions realized that the situation was irreversible, so they worked together to create the Tianji plate. Borrowing the power of the Tianji plate, they moved 9 regions away from their original position and escaped disaster. For 10,000 years, they had been staying in a remote corner of the Jade Conch galaxy, not connecting with the starry sky. In other words, the enemies who attacked 9 regions probably didn't know about the existence of the Tianji plate. Only the native cultivators of 9 regions knew about this divine object. Thinking of this, Lu Ye's heart moved. He looked at the old man and said, "Senior." The old man's expression became serious. I am Ma Bin of the Tian Continent's Human Emperor sect. Tian Continent, Human Emperor sect. When these words that he had heard before shook Lu Ye's eardrums, all of his doubts suddenly became clear. But he had never expected that one day he would be able to meet the powerhouses of the previous 9 regions era. Because according to the information Xiaojiu had provided and the battle situation shown to him, All the cultivators of the previous 9 regions era who were qualified to participate in the battle had rushed into the starry sky to fight. In other words, as long as their cultivation reached the constellation level, they would have killed their way into the battlefield. Lu Yi didn't know the final result of that battle, and Xiao Jiao didn't know either. Because when the final battle began, the power of the Tianji plate was activated and 9 regions was moved away. But the situation was obviously not optimistic. With this region as a retreat, the cultivators of the previous 9 regions era could still retreat to recuperate and recover. Without this region as a retreat, it was a situation of fighting to the death. It was not impossible for them to be completely wiped out. Lu Yi had always thought that the powerhouses of the previous 9 regions era had all died in battle. Even if they hadn't died in battle, they should have died of old age after so many years. Because according to the current cultivation system, the lifespan of a constellation cultivator was 2,000 years, Yu Yao 4,000 years, and Ri 8,000 years. Those with long lifespans might be able to live for a few more years, but it was still very difficult for them to live for 10,000 years. Of course, this number was only in theory. In reality, as cultivators grew and survived, they would often fight with others. Injuries were a common occurrence. Even if they recovered, it would affect their lifespan. That was why Tang Jun was approaching the end of his lifespan. For Ma Bin to be able to live until now, it was unknown what means he had used and what price he had paid. Of course, it was also possible that the other party was lying, but Lu Yi felt that it was completely unnecessary. Ma Bin was such a powerful cultivator. If he really wanted to inquire about any information from him, he had many means. There was no need to lie that he was from the previous 9 regions. The most important point was that Ma Bin mentioned the Tianji plate. This should be a secret that only the cultivators of the previous 9 regions knew. In the current 9 regions era, only Lu Yi knew about it. To be safe, Lu Yi still asked, "What's the Tianji plate?" Ma Bin chuckled. "Don't pretend. I participated in the creation of the Tianji plate in the past. I'm very familiar with its aura. It's just that I haven't felt it for 10,000 years. When I felt it a few days ago, I thought I was hallucinating." There was no need to probe anymore. Lu Yi took a deep breath and straightened his face. He put away the Panshan saber and bowed to the elder in front of him. Lu Yi of the Jade Blood sect of the War Province greets Senior. "You're from the War Province?" "Good. There used to be a righteous sect in the War Province. They were all tough bones like you. There's a righteous sect in the War Province now, but there's no righteous sect," Lu Yi said. "Maybe it's a legacy from the past. After 10,000 years, many things have changed." Ma Bin sighed and gestured with his hand. "Sit." Lu Yi sat down in front of him obediently. He thought for a while and said, "Senior, did you notice me that day?" Naturally, he was asking about the incident on Fishing Island 3 months ago. Ma Bin nodded. "I noticed the aura of the Tianji plate on you. That's why I kept an eye on you. I had someone investigate you and thought of a way to lure you here." It seemed that Zhu Yuan was indeed Ma Bin's man. He was also acting under Ma Bin's orders. Lu Yi frowned and said, "In that case, Zhu Yuan isn't from the Sky Spill star system. This trip to deliver supplies is completely false." Ma Bin said, "That's right. However, Zhu Yuan is very meticulous. He was afraid that you would be suspicious, so he specially recruited 2 more people. That so-called information about how one can reach Jade Conch by borrowing the path from the Sky Spill Galaxy and entering Yunshang, it's fake. He got someone to spread it. However, it's true that one can enter Yunshang by borrowing the path from the Sky Spill Galaxy. The cultivators of Yunshang Galaxy also used this method to enter Wanxiang Galaxy." Chapter 1398. Lu Yi understood what was going on. How could things be so coincidental and go so smoothly? Chao Xiang had just found out about the Jade Conch when he went to Zhaolai Island. He just happened to see the cultivators from the Sky Spill Galaxy recruiting people. He smoothly obtained a reward from Zhu Yuanshang and accepted the recruitment. That was why Zhu Yuan was unwilling to go to Fair Island before he left. In his opinion, among the 3 people he recruited, the other 2 would definitely not survive no matter if they were good or bad. It made no difference whether they went to Fair Island or not. All of this was just a trap targeted at him. The ultimate goal was to lure him here to meet Ma Bin. To think that he even asked for 2,000 spirit jades from Tang Jun for travel expenses? Senior, you spent so much effort to lure me here. Do you have any instructions for me? Lu Yi composed himself and asked. Since the information he received was false, it was unrealistic to use Sky Spill to return to the Jade Conch. He had to find out more information. However, he did not know why Ma Bin asked Zhu Yuan to lure him here. Lu Yi was not worried that Ma Bin would harm him. However, it was very difficult for a constellation like him to interfere in matters of the sunshine level. He was afraid that he would fail to live up to his senior's expectations. I just wanted to see you. Ma Bin smiled and said, to tell you the truth, the plan to move the 9 regions 10,000 years ago was hastily decided. No one could guarantee that it would succeed, but if it didn't move, what awaited the 9 regions was the fate of being massacred. Therefore, we could only give it a try. However, no one had ever done something like moving a domain before, and most of them didn't dare to do it because it was very risky. If one was not careful, the entire domain would collapse, and all the creatures in the domain would die. Now it seems that it has succeeded? Seems like it has succeeded? If it had not been successful, there would be no 9 states now. Lu Yi was sitting here perfectly fine. This undoubtedly explains some things. Lu Yi nodded. It was very successful. In these past 10,000 years, although the 9 provinces couldn't be considered peaceful and auspicious, the cultivation atmosphere was still quite good. Cultivators thrived and the foundation of the domain steadily increased. Several years ago, it was promoted to a large domain. Ma Bin was a little surprised. Logically speaking, the 9 states should not have grown so quickly. Back then, the seniors were even mentally prepared for the 9 states to lose its qualification as a cultivation realm. Because of that plan, the realm's foundation was greatly damaged. It was very likely that the 9 states would not be able to recover. Then, its foundation would dissipate and the spiritual energy would disappear. It would become an ordinary realm with no cultivators. Compared to being massacred, this result was acceptable. No matter what, the living beings of the 9 states could continue to survive, but they could not cultivate. In the starry sky, there were many realms where no cultivators existed. But when he saw Lu Yi for the first time, Ma Bin knew that the 9 states had become a large realm because only large realms could give birth to constellation realm cultivators. Lu Yi said, the senior's prediction of the outcome of the 9 states was not accurate. This junior is unwilling to comment, but the foundation of the 9 states was indeed weak for a while back then. The level of the cultivators in the realm was not high. Now that it has developed like this, the Heavenly Secrets Plate has contributed greatly. Senior, you may not know, but the Heavenly Secrets Plate gave birth to an artifact spirit many years ago by chance. Moreover, it is an artifact spirit that has fused with the origin of the 9 states. It has a very strong independent mind. It has been developing under the Heavenly Secrets Plate's management. Ma Bin's eyes lit up. The artifact spirit of the Heavenly Secrets Plate is actually so amazing? This was something that the seniors back then could not predict. It was also an unexpected surprise. But then again, even if one's cultivation was as strong as sunshine, it was impossible to predict everything. At that time, the experts of the 9 states era had prepared for the worst and the best response. They did not have the strength to worry about the rest because they all rushed to the astral battlefield and died fighting. At that time, Ma Bin had just become a constellation realm cultivator. Because his cultivation was not high, he was not valued by the enemy. Instead, he coincidentally avoided a disaster. Seeing that Ma Bin was full of interest, Lu Yi said, if Senior wants to listen, can this junior tell you more about the 9 states? I want to listen. Ma Bin shifted his body into a more comfortable position and looked at Lu Yi with interest. Lu Yi could not talk about things that happened too long ago. He could only talk about some things that he had experienced and understood. He talked about the structure of the confrontation between the 2 camps in the 9 states. He talked about the Spirit Stream battlefield, the Cloud River battlefield, and the various checkpoints at the front line. He also talked about how Little 9 covered the 9 states' existence. allowing the 9 states to pass through the 10,000 years peacefully. He also talked about how Little Nine picked up various floating continents and broken realms from the starry sky and turned them into secret realms, allowing the cultivators of the 9 states to experience the various styles of the other realms in advance. There was also the insect disaster. For the first time in history, the two camps cooperated sincerely and worked together to kill their way into the insect race's secret realms and destroy their nests. There was also the mighty army that went on an expedition to the blood-refining realm. Like a divine army descending from the heavens, the blood race army was defeated and the humans of that realm were rescued. All these things were just small things in the eyes of Sunshine, but Ma Bin listened with great interest. He even showed a look of longing, hating that he could not participate in it personally. 10,000 years was a long time. Even someone with a powerful cultivation like him would feel homesick. However, after so many years, he had never taken the initiative to inquire about the 9 states, let alone search for it. He did not even know if the 9 states still existed. This was because he was too big of a target. Once he took action, he would easily be targeted by his enemies. If he brought disaster to his homeland because of this, he would not be able to absolve himself of the blame even if he died 10,000 times. The current 9 states was protected by the blood of countless ancestors of the previous 9 states era. He could not help the 9 states in any way, but he definitely could not do anything that would endanger the 9 states. When he heard that the 9 states foundation was improved by absorbing the blood-refining realm, Ma Bin's expression turned solemn. If that's the case, the 9 states is now a rapidly growing realm? It should be. Lu Yi nodded. Speaking of which, the 9 states was targeted by Sunshine not long after it became a large realm and connected to the starry sky. Ma Bin's expression turned cold and murderous. What's Sunshine's name? Where did he come from? From the looks of it, it seemed like he was about to attack and kill him. I'm not sure where he came from, but his name was Yu Exin. However, Senior, don't worry. Back then, I found Senior Yang Qing under Little Jio's guidance and helped him escape. Yu Exin was already killed by Senior Yang Qing. Yang Qing? Ma Bin was stunned for a moment before he reacted. Yes, he was an old friend of the sect leader. Because he made some mistakes, the sect leader sealed him away. It seemed like he was just going through the motions and was quickly released. In the end, when the 9 states' enemies attacked, this senior wanted to escape and help them at the most critical moment, but the sect leader did not allow it. He did not want to suffer with us. He was very strong, so it was normal for Sunshine to be killed by him. If that's the case, is Senior Yang Qing overseeing the 9 states' homeland? Lu Yi shook his head. After Senior Yang Qing escaped, he brought me to the reincarnation tree to participate in the battle for the deity ocean. When he returned, he left alone. As for where he went, he did not say. I don't know either. Ma Bin's eyes flashed, as if he had realized something. Speaking of the reincarnation tree, Lu Yi suddenly remembered something. Senior, the reincarnation tree has a clone in the 9 states. It should know that the 9 states is still intact and knows about the location of the deity ocean. Did you go there to inquire? Ma Bin shook his head. There are experts hiding outside the reincarnation tree. If I show myself, I will not be able to hide my tracks. I also wanted to go to the reincarnation tree to inquire, but unfortunately, I never had the chance. Lu Yi was slightly disappointed. If Ma Bin had asked the reincarnation tree to inquire about the 9 states, he might have known about the deity ocean's location. He would have been able to find out the specific path back to the 9 states. However, Ma Bin had never inquired about it. Then how did you come to the Wanxiang galaxy? Since you are here, how could you not know the way back? You even had to ask the Wanxiang Chamber of Commerce for information. Ma Bin was especially confused about this. However, it was fortunate that Lu Yi had asked the Wanxiang Chamber of Commerce for information. Otherwise, Zhu Yuan would not have had the chance to lead him here. It's a long story. Lu Yi sighed. He briefly explained how Yu Xin had set up the formation that connected the Wushuang continent and the 9 states, and how the Wushuang continent had become an important training ground for the 9 states' true lake and deity ocean. Then, he talked about the invasion of the Qingli Taoist world, how he had used the red talisman to kill Yu Yao, and how he was chased by Tang Jun, which led to the formation of the insect path. Tang Jun and I were trapped in the insect path. In the end, we used a treasure to escape. When we came back to our senses, we were already in the Wanxiang galaxy. The insect path had just formed and was not stable, so we could not return. The twists and turns of the story surprised even someone like Ma Bin. As for the treasure that could help people escape from the insect path, Lu Yi did not elaborate, and Ma Bin did not ask. However, he was very interested in another matter. How did you get the dwarf race's red talisman? Logically speaking, the 9 states had just been promoted to a large domain, and everything in the starry sky was unknown. The dwarf race's red talisman was extremely precious, so where did Lu Yi get one? Senior, as you know, the 9 states had just been promoted to a large domain, and us constellations had begun to explore the surrounding starry sky. I accidentally saved a dwarf race, and then entered the Fangsuan mountain to do them a great favor. The red talisman was given by the dwarf race's sunshine. This favor should not be small. You are a person with a fortuitous opportunity. Ma Bin's face was full of admiration, and he seemed to have thought of something interesting. It must be very shocking to enter the starry sky for the first time, right? When I entered the starry sky for the first time, I was dumbfounded. Fortunately, my senior brothers and sisters led me, otherwise, I would not have been able to find the way back. Speaking of these interesting things, his eyes revealed a look of reminiscence. Unfortunately, 10,000 years had passed, and those familiar faces had long disappeared. Reminiscing now would only increase his sadness. He shook his head. Continue talking about you guys. The old man's affairs are gloomy, and you young people are lively. Chapter 1399. In the cave, Lu Yi and Ma Bin sat opposite each other and talked. Most of the time, it was Lu Yi who was talking while Ma Bin listened attentively. Ma Bin drank a lot of wine with a happy expression. A few days later, Ma Bin drank the last pot of wine and wiped his mouth. Okay, since 9 regions is still peaceful, this old man can be considered relieved. It's getting late, this old man should leave. As he spoke, he stood up. When he was sitting cross-legged, Lu Yi felt that his figure was majestic. When he stood up, he was even taller. Lu Yi didn't know where he was going and what he was going to do, but he couldn't help but ask, "Is there anything this junior can help with?" Ma Bin smiled. "You can't interfere with what this old man is going to do, and there is no need for you to interfere." Looking at the young and vigorous face in front of him, Ma Bin's expression turned solemn. He warned, "Remember, from now on, you don't know me, and I don't know you. You and this old man have never met before." They were all smart people, and some words didn't need to be said too clearly. If it weren't for the urgent need to know the current situation of 9 regions, Ma Bin wouldn't have asked Zhu Yuan to find a way to lead Lu Yi here. For people like him, even if this meeting was extremely secret, there was still a certain amount of risk. Now that his wish had been fulfilled, Ma Bin naturally didn't want 9 regions to have anything to do with him. The span of 10,000 years was completely divided into 2 eras, the former 9 regions era. Naturally, this matter should be done by the people of the former 9 regions era. There was no need to involve the latter 9 regions. Even if the current 9 regions encountered an irresistible strong enemy and were enslaved, it was better than being involved with him. Even before that, he had set a test for Lu Yi by putting pressure on him. If Lu Yi couldn't hold on at that time and really knelt down and begged for mercy, then after asking about the current situation of 9 regions, he would definitely kill him. Because of the particularity of 9 regions, such a greedy person who was afraid of death couldn't be allowed to be active outside, lest one day inadvertently expose the existence of 9 regions and bring disaster to 9 regions. However, Lu Yi's performance undoubtedly satisfied him. In such a situation, not only did Lu Yi not kneel down and beg for mercy as he wanted, but he fought to the death, which was very much to his appetite. In his opinion, the cultivators of 9 regions should be like this. They would rather die standing than live kneeling. As Ma Bin walked out of the cave, Lu Yi saw Zhu Yuan standing there perfectly fine. Not only was he not dead, even the arm that he had cut off had been reattached. With Zhu Yuanxing's late-stage cultivation, it was normal for him to be able to reattach a severed arm, but it was abnormal for him to be able to come back from the dead. Looking at it now, Zhu Yuan's death a few days ago was probably just a kind of trick. It was just that Ma Bin's move was too ingenious, tricking him. With his hands behind his back, Ma Bin turned his head and took one last look at Lu Yi. He patted him on the shoulder and said earnestly, "Live well." As soon as he finished speaking, his body slammed forward and directly crashed into Zhu Yuan's body. Like a wisp of green smoke, he disappeared without a trace. Even Lu Yi was amazed by such a wondrous method. He finally understood why Ma Bin was still able to hide here after wreaking havoc in the myriad phenomenon sea. With such a mysterious technique, it would be strange if Nicho of the Wanxiang galaxy could find him. Zhu Yuan summoned his star boat and soared into the sky. Lu Yi followed him with his eyes. This short journey had shaken him quite a bit. He really didn't expect that there were still experts from the previous 9 regions era who survived. He had kept Ma Bin's advice in mind, and he was even more aware that it was indeed not suitable for him to get involved. Ma Bin was currently free and unfettered. He had killed Rizhao in the Wanxiang Sea, and was still able to come and go freely in the Wanxiang galaxy because he had nothing to worry about. However, if he were to involve Jiuzhou with him, it would inevitably become his weakness and shackle, which would be extremely disadvantageous for Jiuzhou. After a few days of conversation, Lu Ye's impression of Ma Bin was that he was forthright and generous, not bothering about trifles. However, from the way this old senior acted, Lu Yi knew that he was not a good person. His temperament was also extremely evil and cruel. Although he was not a good person, he was still one of them. He turned back and returned to the cave. There were 2 dried corpses lying there. They were the pitiful Fan Yunhua and Jia Yu. They were dragged into the cave by Ma Bin and instantly lost their vitality. Even their flesh and blood had dried up. At first glance, they looked like zombies of the corpse race. After searching for a while, he found a few storage rings on their bodies. Only then did he skillfully destroy the corpses. He was not in a hurry to leave. Now that the Wanxiang Sea had entered a period of silence, he didn't know what to do even if he went back. He might as well open the restriction locks on these storage rings and see if there was anything good inside. These 2 were late Constellation Realm cultivators. Their wealth couldn't be too shabby, right? However, Lu Yi knew that he couldn't place too much hope in this kind of thing. Cultivators who would go to Laika Island for work were generally not that rich. Lu Yi thought of Tang Jun again. Before leaving, he had told him the details and even asked him for travel expenses. If he suddenly ran back, would the old man think that he was cheating him of his money? Like storage bags, storage rings had restriction locks. However, for Lu Yi, who was proficient in the Tao of spirit tattoos, it was not difficult to unlock them. He already had experience in this aspect. After checking the rings one by one, he gained some things. It was similar to Lu Ye's expectations. Both Fan Yunhua and Jia Yu had some wealth, but they were not rich. Their combined spiritual jades did not even add up to 2,000 pieces. Apart from that, there were all the spiritual pills for cultivation, some random materials, and a few spiritual treasures. If he took those spiritual treasures to the Wanxiang Chamber of Commerce to sell, he could earn a total of 10,000 spiritual jades. Although he didn't want to return to the Wanxiang Sea, he still had to go. Although the Wanxiang galaxy was big, he really didn't know where else to go besides the Wanxiang Sea. Just as he was about to leave, there was a sudden fluctuation of spiritual power outside, as if someone was descending from the sky. Lu Yi hurriedly restrained his aura. It was not that he wanted to hide anything, but he was used to being cautious. However, the newcomer obviously also noticed this cave. With a chuckle, a figure suddenly barged in. In an instant their eyes met. Lu Yi coldly sized up the newcomer. When he saw the other party's face, he was slightly surprised because the other party's face was very young. Although cultivators all had their own ways of maintaining their appearance, and the higher one's cultivation level, the slower one's appearance would age. However, experienced people could still tell if a person was really young. Some people looked young, but the vicissitudes in their eyes could not be hidden. Some people were really young. The one in front of him was the latter. Lu Yi even suspected that this guy was not even 20 years old. He was dressed appropriately. Although he did not look luxurious, it was obvious that he came from a big family. His aptitude was undoubtedly very high. Otherwise, it would be impossible for him to reach the early stage of the constellation realm at this age. In the 9 prefectures, young people of this age were basically still struggling in the battlefield of the Cloudy River. In comparison, even if he had an extraordinary background and did not lack cultivation resources, to have such a cultivation at such a young age, his talent was undoubtedly extremely outstanding. The young man was stunned at first, then he was extremely vexed. I can even meet people here? How unlucky! As he spoke, he turned around and walked out. However, after taking 2 steps, he suddenly seemed to have thought of something. He turned around, his young face showing a fierce expression. I'm warning you. You didn't see me, and I didn't see you. Do you understand? Lu Yi looked at him calmly. He had heard similar words twice today. Did you hear me? If you did, then nod. Otherwise, I won't hold back. As the young man spoke, he pinched his fingers, and a red light bloomed from his fingertips. It was a red talisman. With his early-stage constellation realm cultivation, he could probably only activate the power of a late-stage constellation realm cultivator. Even Yu Yao could not reach that level. However, a red talisman was still a red talisman. This made Lu Yi even more certain that this young man came from an extraordinary background. Ordinary people would not have such a treasure. Lu Yi glanced at the red talisman and nodded slightly. Only then did the young man reveal a satisfied expression. Smart. As he spoke, he left in a flash. After he left, Lu Yi packed up his things and stood up. He took out his planetary boat and left. He had to think about how to explain this to Tang Jun. In addition, Lu Yi was considering whether he should go to the Myriad Elephant Chamber of Commerce to look for Chao Xiang again. The information was not accurate, but he had paid the spirit jades. Would the Myriad Elephant Chamber of Commerce continue to investigate the Jade Snail Galaxy for him? However, after careful consideration, he gave up on the idea. If he went to look for Chao Xiang, he would definitely ask about what had happened. Lu Yi could not explain it clearly. He would have to wait for a while. Following the guidance of the star chart, Lu Yi approached the Myriad Elephant Sea. However, he soon discovered something strange. The number of cultivators coming and going on his way had obviously increased. Moreover, judging from their posture, they seemed to be looking for something. Lu Yi did not pay them much attention. No matter what they were looking for, it had nothing to do with him. Until one of the starships stopped his star boat. It was a flying treasure used by cultivators to travel through the starry sky. In fact, there were 2 types of flying treasures. The first type was the planetary boat, which was similar to the silverfish and Lu Ye's current boat. The second type was the starship. The specter ship that Lu Yi had been to before was a starship. The biggest difference between a planetary boat and a starship was that it did not have the ability to attack. The former was purely used for traveling. It had good defense, but it did not have the ability to attack. If there was a need to attack, the cultivators on the boat would have to do it themselves. However, a starship had the ability to attack. Because it was equipped with offensive formations and offensive treasures as the formation cores, it looked more terrifying just from the outside. Of course, there was a huge difference in price. A starship was at least 10 times more expensive than a planetary boat. In other words, even the cheapest starship would cost 200,000 spirit jades. If the specter ship was in good condition, it would cost at least 1,000,000 spirit jades. It was not something that ordinary cultivators could afford. Only the realms and sects with enough resources could afford it. Chapter 1400. Back then, when little Jiao had shown Lu Yi the scene of the land of the 9 prefectures being besieged by various experts, Lu Yi had seen the shocking scene of starships of all shapes and sizes gathering in the sky. Although he had not been in the Myriad Phenomenon Galaxy for a long time, he had seen some starships sweeping across the starry sky. If it was just a planetary boat blocking his way, Lu Yi could ignore it. After all, they were both using planetary boats. Even if his planetary boat was the cheapest one, the other party would not be able to forcefully stop it. However, it was a different story if it was intercepted by a starship. If it insisted on resisting, the starship might not be able to withstand an attack from the other party. After stopping the planetary boat, Lu Yi immediately sensed a divine sense spreading out. 3 figures walked out of the planetary boat opposite him. 2 of them stood on the left and the other on the right, blocking the possible escape routes of the planetary boat. The last person landed directly on the planetary boat. Lu Yi didn't panic, because in the myriad phenomenon galaxy, strategic weapons like starships generally belonged to the major forces of the galaxy. They wouldn't make things difficult for an outsider like him, so as to avoid ruining their reputation. The most likely reason was that they wanted to do something. Sure enough, after the late-stage constellation cultivator landed on the star boat, he stood still and cupped his fists towards Lu Yi. "Fellow Taoist, sorry for disturbing you." His tone was very polite. "What's the matter?" Lu Yi asked. The man was a little surprised. The young master of Che Ling Realm's Thousand Sunsets sect has run away from home again. We are under orders to assist in the search, so we want to check your planetary boat to see if it is hiding anything. Lu Yi waved his hand. "My planetary boat is only so big. You can check it yourselves." The planetary boat he bought was only worth 30,000 spirit jades, and it could only carry 2 to 3 people. It was obvious at a glance that it was impossible to hide anything. The late-stage constellation cultivator nodded. "Please forgive us for disturbing you, fellow Taoist. Also, I want to inform you that the Thousand Sunsets sect will reward you with 20,000 spirit jades if you can provide any useful clues. If you can bring the young master back, you will be rewarded with 100,000 spirit jades." It was true that the Thousand Sunsets sect had offered such a generous reward just because the young master had run away from home. It was obvious that the Thousand Sunsets sect was a sect that did not lack spirit jades. Come to think of it, the local forces of the Wanxiang galaxy relied on the mountains and the sea for their livelihood. With such a large Wanxiang ocean here, there was probably no one who lacked money. This is the young master's image, as well as some relevant information about his physical characteristics. As the late-stage constellation master spoke, he handed Lu Yi a jade slip. Lu Yi took it and looked at it briefly before nodding slightly. "I understand." Suddenly, he realized that the cultivators he encountered on the way back had most likely received the news and were searching for the young master of the Myriad Dawn sect. For any constellation, the 10,000 Sunset sect's reward was extremely generous. Just providing effective clues was worth 20,000 spirit jades. If they could bring that young master back, it would be worth 100,000 spirit jades. Compared to finding work on Zhao Lei Island, this was undoubtedly more attractive. "Sorry to disturb you." The late-stage star constellation realm cultivator apologized and was about to leave. Lu Yi muttered to himself for a moment before calling out, "Fellow Taoist, please wait." The man turned around and asked, "Is there something else?" Lu Yi said, "Since this young master ran away from home, he probably won't go back with others willingly, right? If we really find him, won't we have to fight him and subdue him with force? If we injure him—" The late-stage star constellation realm cultivator smiled. "Fellow Taoist, please don't worry about this. Senior Juyen has already said that as long as we don't kill him or leave him with untreatable injuries, it doesn't matter how we punish him. Oh, Senior Juyen is that young master's birth mother. She's also a Sunshine Realm cultivator, so fellow Taoist, you don't have to feel burdened." After a pause, he continued, "However, if you really want to fight with that young master, you still have to be careful because he has a lot of treasures on him. I heard that he also has the red talisman that Senior Juyen gave him. If he activates the red talisman and kills you, you'll have died for nothing." Lu Yi nodded slightly. Different people have different lives. With a Sunshine Realm cultivator as his birth mother, he can indeed do whatever he wants. The late-stage star constellation realm cultivator smiled and left without saying anything else. After a while, he and his companions boarded the starship and left. Lu Yi stopped in place and pondered for a moment. Then, he turned around and went back the way he came. Although the image of the young master recorded in the jade slip was different from the one he saw on the desolate star, some of the characteristics were the same. Especially the cultivation. According to the jade slip, the young master's cultivation was at the early stage star constellation realm. The young man he saw was also at the early stage star constellation realm. Originally, he only suspected that the young man might be the guy who ran away from home. However, when the late-stage star constellation realm cultivator mentioned the red talisman, Lu Yi was almost certain that the young man he saw was the young master of the Thousand Sunset sect. As for the appearance, it was very common to have treasures that could change one's appearance. When Lu Yi was active in the 9 prefectures, he even bought some face masks. That young master had a Sunshine Realm cultivator as his backer. What kind of treasures couldn't he get? He also didn't expect that the young man he met by chance was actually a walking 100,000 spirit jades. Since the birth mother of the Thousand Sunset sect had said that as long as the young man wasn't killed or left with untreatable injuries, there was no need to hesitate. Moreover, Lu Yi also noticed that the young master of the Thousand Sunset sect had run away from home again. This meant that he had done this more than once. He probably had the experience of being beaten up and brought back. One day later, Lu Yi returned to the desolate star. With a glance, he saw traces of cultivators entering and leaving the desolate star. Obviously, they were looking for the young master. However, it was obvious that they didn't find anything. Ran away? Lu Yi frowned slightly. Since the young man ran away from home, it was obvious that he didn't want to be found again. Previously, he accidentally bumped into Lu Yi. Fearing that his whereabouts would be exposed, it was normal for him to leave quickly. However, at that time, Lu Yi didn't know about this at all. How could he have thought that he would capture him on the spot? Instead, he missed out on a windfall. However, since he was already here, Lu Yi decided to search for him. He flew over the surface of the desolate star at a low altitude. He spread out his divine perception and searched carefully. However, he didn't find anything. That young master of the Thousand Sunset sect called Chu Shun might have really run away. The desolate star wasn't big. With Lu Ye's cultivation at the mid-stage star constellation realm, it would take him at most 4 hours to search the entire place. He thought that there was no hope. Who knew that when he passed by a place, he would see some clues with a glance. This was the place where he chatted with Ma Bin previously. There was originally a cave here, but when he passed by it now, he realized that the cave had disappeared. There was no reason for such a big cave to disappear for no reason. Even if it was destroyed, there should be some traces left behind. However, in reality, there weren't any traces left behind. Lu Yi floated in the air at the original location of the cave. He understood that there was probably some kind of formation set up here to conceal it. Moreover, the method of setting up the formation was quite brilliant. Otherwise, the star constellation realm cultivators who came here to search wouldn't have noticed it. This meant that Chu Shun was hiding here. He was a smart guy. However, it was a pity that he was too smart for his own good. He naturally thought that Lu Yi wouldn't return after leaving. However, he didn't know that when Lu Yi saw him, he didn't know about the Thousand Sunset sect's reward at all. He lowered his head and looked down. He observed the structure of the spirit veins carefully. After a while, he saw a flaw. Lu Yi said softly, "Do you want to come out yourself, or do you want me to drag you out?" There was no response. Lu Yi didn't waste any time. He directly pulled out his mountain saber and slashed down fiercely. There was clearly nothing in front of him. However, when the long saber landed, a layer of ripples suddenly appeared. A protective light screen blocked Lu Ye's attack. An exasperated voice sounded, "You promised me before, but now you're back. Do you still have any shame?" Obviously, he saw Lu Ye's face. Lu Yi ignored him and continued to slash. To him, it wasn't difficult to break this formation. Although the method of setting up the formation was ingenious, it was still inferior to his. With the spirit veins of insight, the nodes of the formation could be seen clearly. After 3 slashes, accompanied by a cry of surprise, the formation collapsed. The other party obviously didn't expect that the formation he set up would be so weak. The original cave was revealed, and Lu Yi directly landed at the entrance. The exasperated voice became more and more manic. It even sounded fierce. "I'm warning you, don't come in. Otherwise, I won't be polite." Saying so, a mysterious light suddenly shot out from the cave. Lu Yi was caught off guard and was hit by it. His body suddenly stiffened, as if he was bound by some inexplicable shackles. Haha! Loud laughter rang out. As the voice got closer and closer, the owner of the laughter gradually appeared in Lu Ye's vision. It was the young man he had met before. He was holding a mirror in his hand, and the mysterious light was coming from this mirror. This mirror clearly had the power to slow down a person's movements. He first used words to lure Lu Yi into lowering his guard, then suddenly attacked. Sure enough, it was effective. Just from this point alone, it could be seen that he was also a cunning guy. This was normal. If he was really an inflexible person, he wouldn't have run away from home. He walked up to Lu Yi and said proudly, "If you left, then you left. Why did you come back and ask for trouble? Just for a little reward? Tell me, should I kill you or not? After all, you found me. If I let you go, you'll definitely go to my mother to claim the reward." "You want to kill me?" Lu Yi looked at him indifferently. Chu Shin showed a difficult expression. "We have no grievances, so I don't really want to kill you. But letting you go is not appropriate. How about this? You become my subordinate and obey my orders from now on." Saying so, he took out a long needle-like treasure and poked it at Lu Ye's forehead. "Bear with it, it'll hurt a little. It'll be fine in a while." Lu Yi didn't know what this long needle was, but from what he said, it seemed that it could make Lu Yi obediently obey. Just as the long needle was about to poke Lu Ye's forehead, Lu Yi suddenly raised his hand and grabbed his wrist. Chu Shin's expression became stunned. "How did you? It didn't make sense." After being hit by his mirror's mysterious light, a mid-stage constellation realm cultivator would be unable to move for at least 10 breaths. How could he recover so quickly? Chapter 1401. Chu Shen was born in Che Ling Boundary's Thousand Sunset sect, and his mother was a sunshine powerhouse. Naturally, he did not lack cultivation resources since he was young, and he had many mysterious treasures on him. The mirror was called the Body Solidifying Mirror. As the name implied, the mystic light it shot out had the effect of freezing a person's body. Moreover, the mystic light shot out at an extremely fast speed. Unless the target was prepared in advance, there was no way to avoid it. Even Lu Yi had suffered a loss just now. Fortunately, after the mystic light entered his body, it was immediately burned by the talent tree, allowing him to regain his freedom. At this moment, he suddenly grabbed Chu Shin's wrist, shocking him. However, this guy's reaction was extremely fast. Before the stunned expression on his face disappeared, the long needle in his other hand trembled slightly. Like lightning, it quickly pierced towards Lu Ye's forehead. At the same time, Lu Yi bent his knee and slammed forward. Chu Shin groaned, and his body could not help but bend slightly. The long needle suddenly turned and pierced towards Lu Ye's temple. Just based on his reaction speed and adaptability, this guy far surpassed ordinary constellation cultivators. Obviously, he also had rich battle experience, which surprised Lu Yi. With his background, people who had reached the constellation realm at such a young age were usually people who only had cultivation and were lacking in other aspects. But now, it seemed that he did have some ability. Moreover, from the feedback of the collision of spiritual energy, the other party's spiritual energy was also extremely pure. In other words, this guy probably had the strength to fight with people above his realm. Coupled with his mysterious treasures, even a constellation realm middle-stage cultivator would not have a good ending if they were careless when facing him. But in the end, he met Lu Yi, who had also experienced hundreds of battles and was especially good at close combat. The long needle pierced towards Lu Ye's temple. This time, Lu Yi didn't dodge. Just as Chu Shen thought he was about to succeed, his vision suddenly spun. When he came back to his senses, he was already lying on the ground, like a dog eating mud. His lower back was held, and one of his arms was held in the opposite direction. He wanted to resist again, but the wrist holding the long needle was also grabbed by Lu Yi, and fiercely twisted, Chu Shen spat out the sand in his mouth and couldn't help but curse. He really couldn't understand who he had met this time. Even if his cultivation was a level higher than his, he shouldn't have been so powerless to fight back and be taken down. He quickly cried out in pain, "Ouch, ouch, ouch, let go." Since Lu Yi had taken him down, how could he let go? One hand clamped down on him, the other hand rummaged through his storage ring. He remembered that he had specially kept a large net-type spirit treasure for capturing people. When he had just arrived at Wanxiang Galaxy, someone had used it to deal with him. Lu Yi reached out his hand, the net. Chu Shen was like a fish in a fish. Trapped in the net, Chu Shen couldn't even move his hands and feet. His spiritual energy couldn't circulate smoothly either. His face turned green with anger as he shouted, "A warrior can be killed but not humiliated." Lu Yi summoned the star boat and threw Chu Shen into it. Then he jumped on and drove the star boat into the sky. He took out a star chart and compared it to the route to Che Ling realm. On the star boat, Chu Shen had been yelling at Lu Yi to let him go at first. However, when he saw that Lu Yi wasn't going to budge, he started to threaten Lu Yi again, saying that he would do something to Lu Yi after he returned to Che Ling realm. Lu Yi just ignored him. Seeing that they were getting closer and closer to the Che Ling realm, Chu Ming panicked and his tone softened. "Fellow Taoist, we have no enmity between us. Why do you have to make things so unpleasant? Didn't you capture me for the reward? How about this? I'll give it to you. You let me go and pretend you never saw me." Lu Yi, who was quietly swallowing spirit pills and cultivating, finally turned to look at him without saying a word. Seeing that there was hope, Chu Shen hastily said, "My mother offered a reward of 100,000 spirit jades, right? I'll give you 150,000. The starboat's speed suddenly dropped. Chu Shen beamed with joy. "A mere 150,000 spirit jades is nothing. Since you know my identity, you should know that I have the ability to take out so many spirit jades. However, I don't have so many spirit jades with me right now. I only have a few thousand spirit jades in total. I can pawn a treasure with you and come back later to redeem it." Lu Yi immediately lost interest and turned his head away. The starboat sped up again. To be honest, when Chu Shen mentioned 150,000 spirit jades, Lu Yi was a little tempted. However, after thinking about it carefully, he felt that it was inappropriate. Capturing Chu Shen and bringing him back to Che Ling realm to earn the reward was a Sunshine Realm cultivator's order. It was his rightful reward. However, if he secretly colluded with Chu Shen and let him go after capturing him, it would be fine if the news didn't spread. However, if it spread to Che Ling realm, he might offend the Sunshine Realm cultivator called Jiu Yen. Not to mention, Chu Shen wanted to pawn a treasure with him. Chu Shen's treasure must have been given to him by his birth mother. Who would dare to take a Sunshine Realm cultivator's treasure? Therefore, after thinking about it, Lu Yi felt that it was better to earn the reward honestly. Since the Sunshine Realm cultivator had spoken and the matter had caused such a commotion, he couldn't possibly go back on his word. Chu Shen was still tempting him with benefits. The price had already increased from 150,000 spirit jades to 200,000 spirit jades. It was not until another starship stopped Lu Ye's planetary ship, and the cultivator leading the starship discovered that Chu Shen had been captured by Lu Yi that he enthusiastically offered to escort him to the Che Ling realm in person. Only then did Chu Shen shut his mouth. If the cultivators in the galaxy hadn't discovered his situation, there would still be room for discussion with Lu Yi. However, now that the cultivators in the galaxy had discovered his situation, there was no room for discussion anymore. He stayed in the large net unhappily and glared at Lu Yi in annoyance. The Che Ling realm was considered a large realm in the Wanxiang Galaxy. Logically speaking, it was extremely difficult for a Sunshine Realm cultivator to appear in such a realm. However, there was more than one Sunshine Realm cultivator in the Che Ling realm. The main reason for this was the existence of the Wanxiang Sea. This space wonder had brought huge benefits to the entire Wanxiang Galaxy. Other cultivators had to search for resources everywhere to cultivate, but the native cultivators of the Wanxiang Galaxy didn't have to worry about that. With abundant resources, it was easy for cultivators to cultivate, and the probability of producing experts was naturally higher. Although the cultivators escorting Lu Yi to Che Ling realm didn't originate from this realm, they were acquainted with the people of Che Ling realm. Therefore, they had already sent word to them before they even arrived. Therefore, as soon as Lu Yi arrived near Che Ling realm, he saw a figure waiting quietly in the distance. Judging from the fluctuation of spiritual energy, it was Yu Yao. Moreover, she was a woman with an extraordinary figure. The starboat stopped not far away from Yu Yao. Lu Yi grabbed the large net that trapped Chu Shen, walked down and untied it. Chu Shen didn't run away. The main reason was that he couldn't run away now that he was here. With his head drooping, he walked forward and bowed to Yu Yao. Aunt Yu. Yu Yao, who was addressed as Aunt Yu, looked Chu Shen up and down. She patted the dust off his clothes, and a doting look appeared in her eyes. You didn't suffer, did you? I told you it was dangerous outside and you shouldn't run around. You didn't listen. Chu Shen's face turned bitter. I'm a constellation now. Aunt Yu glared at him. What's wrong with constellation? You're only 20 years old. You should cultivate obediently for a while. You can go out when your cultivation base has stabilized. Chu Shen looked embarrassed. Lu Yi found this strange. Perhaps this was the trouble of being born in a powerful force. Anyway, the cultivators of the 9 prefectures would never experience it. He was already a constellation, but his elders still treated him like a child. After showing her concern for Chu Shen, Aunt Yu looked at Lu Yi and said in a gentle voice, Are you the one who caught Shen and brought him back? Although she saw it with her own eyes, there were still some things that needed to be confirmed. Yes. Lu Yi nodded. Here's 100,000 spirit jades. It's the reward we agreed on. You can count them yourself. After saying that, she flicked a storage ring at Lu Yi. Lu Yi took it and scanned it with his divine consciousness. Seeing this, Aunt Yu took Chu Shen back to the Che Ling realm and disappeared without a trace. Lu Yi was slightly disappointed. He wanted to take the opportunity to enter the Che Ling realm while escorting Chu Shen back. However, he didn't expect that Chu Shen's parents would pick him up outside the realm. Now, he didn't have the chance to enter. He didn't force it. The starship that escorted him here hadn't left yet. Lu Yi wasn't a stubborn person. He knew what he should do at this moment. He took out an empty storage ring and put 10,000 spirit jades in it. Then, he handed it to the leader of the constellation. Thank you for escorting me all the way. Here are some spirit jades. You can buy some wine to eat. He didn't mean to curry favor with them. It was mainly because they had escorted him all the way, which saved him some trouble. On his way back to the Carriage Bell realm, he encountered quite a number of foreign cultivators who were searching for Chu Shen. His starboat wasn't large, so it wasn't difficult for them to spot Chu Shen. If he hadn't been escorted by a starship, Lu Yi reckoned that someone would have tried to rob him. He was alone, and his cultivation base wasn't high. Who wouldn't be tempted to rob Chu Shen of 100,000 spirit jades? It was common to kill and rob people, not to mention snatching rewards. If he was besieged alone, he wouldn't have the energy to care about Chu Shen in order to protect himself. Once the news spread, it was hard to say who would get the 100,000 spirit jades. He could take 10% of the reward as a token of gratitude. The leader of the constellation cast a meaningful glance at Lu Yi, but he didn't refuse. He just laughed and said, Fellow Taoist, we won't refuse. If you need any help in the myriad phenomenon galaxy in the future, please don't hesitate to call us. Saying so, he exchanged musical notes with Lu Yi, and they got to know each other. This group of people soon left. They still had the mission of patrolling the galaxy, so they naturally couldn't stay for long. After they left, Lu Yi also started the starboat and headed towards the 10,000 Manifestation Sea. He now had another batch of spirit jades in his hand. However, Lu Yi didn't plan to buy any more fire-attributed treasures like dragon breath crystals. After suffering a loss at Yujichi's hands, he felt that it was better to keep some spirit jades in reserve in case he needed them. Chapter 1402. In a quiet place on the fishing island in the Vientiane Sea, Lu Yi sat cross-legged and looked at the formation plate in his hand, deep in thought. It had been 2 months since he sent Chu Shen back to the Che Ling boundary and returned to the Vientiane Sea. In these 2 months, he basically stayed on the fishing island. The main reason was that he had nowhere else to go. There were inns on the Vientiane island where he could stay, but they cost spirit stones and the price was not low. Although Lu Yi had a lot of spirit stones in reserve, he was not willing to spend them on such meaningless things. During the quiet period, there were not many people on the fishing island, and there were many hidden places, so it was very suitable for a cultivator like him who had nowhere to go to stay. He found a place at random and set up a formation to become a place to stay. In these 2 months, apart from cultivation, Lu Yi continued to deduce the twin branch spirit pattern that he had not completed before. It was only completed today. He didn't lack the materials to refine the twin chi connecting branch array disk. With his previous experience, he could easily refine one piece. He slightly activated it and carefully examined it, and found that there were still some shortcomings. However, with his current attainments in the Tao of spirit patterns, it was impossible to continue to deduce it more exquisitely. He could only wait for his attainments in the Tao of spirit patterns to improve in the future. Compared to the formation plate he refined in the 9 provinces, the formation plate in his hand looked no different, but the range it could cover was undoubtedly larger and wider, so it could meet the needs of the constellation realm battles. According to his estimation, such a formation plate should be able to allow 5 or 6 people to fight side by side. 5 or 6 constellation realms connected to form a formation, and the strength it could exert was not to be underestimated. It could be expected that if this thing was released, it would definitely cause a scramble among the major forces. In fact, as early as during the quiet period, Lu Yi had thought about finding a way to make money. Otherwise, it would be difficult to meet his cultivation needs by just relying on the work on the Laika Island. However, in this unfamiliar place with no background, how difficult would it be to find a way to make money? Unless he had a skill. He was good at a few things, but besides fighting, he was best at the Tao of spirit patterns. It could be said that this small twin branch spirit pattern was his hope to continue his cultivation in the future, and he would definitely use it to accumulate a lot of wealth. Lu Yi could already predict how popular the item would be after it was refined, but at this moment, he didn't dare to casually take it out. At the end of the day, there was still a problem. Without a strong enough background, no one could support him. As the saying goes, a man's wealth is his own ruin. If this array disk were to be leaked, Lu Yi would naturally become a hot commodity, but it was more likely that he would be fancied by some great force and forcibly recruited. If such a situation really occurred, Lu Ye's freedom in the future would not be guaranteed. He would be under house arrest forever and would have to work like an ox or horse for the rest of his life to refine this array disk. According to the information he had gathered, there were no other treasures in the current cultivation world that could allow people to form formations at will other than formation talismans. However, formation talismans were extremely difficult to refine and were extremely expensive. Lu Yi had once experienced the power of formation talismans in the dwarf tribe's Black Abyss. Compared to the twin chi-linked branches formation disk, formation talismans were undoubtedly more rigid. This was because formation talismans were based on talismans. Once they were activated, they could only form one kind of formation. Unlike the formation disk, which was based on the user's will, there was no doubt that formation talismans were more rigid. In comparison, the materials used to refine the formation disk were much simpler and took much less time. It was clear which was better and which was worse. Of course, this was from Lu Ye's point of view. If someone else were to refine it, it might not be so easy. Disregarding everything else, the new twin chi-linked branches formation disk that he had deduced was even more complicated than before. If not for the talent tree, Lu Yi would not have been able to construct it so easily. The matter of the formation disk could only be temporarily set aside. He would see if there was a suitable opportunity to sell it in the future. He put away the newly refined formation disk and continued to cultivate. He had to make plans for the Jade Conch Galaxy, but apart from the myriad elephant chamber of commerce, Lu Yi could not think of any other way. He even considered going to the reincarnation tree and asking it about it. However, he did not do so in the end. The main reason was that he could not be sure how long it would take to travel from the reincarnation tree to the Jade Conch Galaxy. A few years or a dozen years was fine, but he was afraid it would take hundreds or thousands of years. If that really happened, he would want to cry but have no tears. Several days passed. While Lu Yi was cultivating, he suddenly felt a mysterious fluctuation of power coming from a certain direction. At first, he did not pay much attention to it, because there were constant disputes on the myriad elephant sea. People would often fight over the slightest disagreement, and the aftermath of their battles would sweep out in all directions. When he was cultivating here, he often felt the movements of people fighting, so he was not surprised. But gradually, he realized that something was not quite right. The fluctuation of power did not seem to be caused by people fighting. Moreover, the source was extremely vague. It seemed to be very close to him, but also very far away. Lu Yi opened his eyes and tried to sense it, but he could not figure out what it was. After a while, the mysterious fluctuation of power became clearer and clearer, followed by a deafening voice wrapped in boundless killing intent that suddenly rang out in his mind. Sharpening the blade and wiping the sword, who can compete with you? Hiding the blade and facing the sky, no one dares to be your enemy. Lu Yi abruptly turned his head and looked in a certain direction. That direction was precisely where the voice came from. Even though he was cultivating, the killing intent and fighting spirit in his heart couldn't help but be aroused by that strange voice. He wished he could find someone to fight right now. Lu Yi was secretly shocked. He did not know who the voice was, but just the voice alone was able to arouse his killing intent from so far away. This ability was beyond his imagination. Just as he was feeling puzzled, the sky above the 10,000 phenomenon sea was in an uproar. Many constellations, alone or in groups, transformed into streaks of flowing light and rushed towards the source of the sound, as if something good had happened there. Those who had starboats rowed them and called for their friends, while those who did not have starboats directly summoned ferries and rushed over. Lu Yi was completely confused by the scene. But then he suddenly remembered something and quickly took out his musical talisman. Just as he was about to send a message, the musical talisman vibrated. After checking it, he found that it was a message from Pu Ku. He was about to send a message to Pu Ku just now because he realized that it was related to something Pu Ku had told him before. The Constellation Hall is open. Do you want to go and join in the fun? Pu Ku's tone was obviously excited and expectant. Let's go. Lu Yi replied concisely. Then, the two agreed to meet on Fishing Island. Lu Yi waited quietly. The Myriad Elephant Galaxy had 3 space wonders, and the first was the Myriad Elephant Sea. This was the source of the entire Myriad Elephant Galaxy's prosperity. It could be said that without the Myriad Elephant Sea, there would not be the lively Myriad Elephant Galaxy today, and there would not be guests from all over. But in addition to the Myriad Elephant Sea, there were 2 other wonders in this galaxy. The Constellation Hall was one of them. Some people said that it was a starry sky treasure that had yet to fully evolve, because it did look like a treasure on the surface, but it could not be taken away by anyone. Since ancient times, it had been entrenched in a certain part of the starry sky of the Wanxiang Galaxy, more like a starry sky wonder. Throughout the ages, this constellation palace did indeed possess some of the characteristics of a starry sky supreme treasure. That was why there were rumors that it was a starry sky supreme treasure that had not fully evolved. Most of the space treasures and space wonders were born when the world was first created. They existed for as long as the universe existed. Even now, there were many space wonders and space treasures in the process of being born. As for when they would be born and whether they would be born, no one knew. It was possible that something had happened to the Constellation Hall during the process of being born, causing it to be incomplete. The reason why it was called the Constellation Hall was mainly because only Constellation Realm cultivators could enter it. It could be said that every time the Constellation Hall opened, it was a feast for Constellation Realm cultivators. Lu Yi did not know much about the Constellation Hall. He had only heard Pu Ku mention it casually when he was fishing with him. He would have to ask Pu Ku about it later. A moment later, a big ladle flew over from afar. Judging from its shape, it was the ladle that Pu Ku always wore around his waist. It was also a starboat, but its shape was slightly more unique. Lu Yi flew up and landed on the ground. He discovered that there was another person besides Pu Ku. He had seen it before. It was a ghost from the Ghost Clan. Isn't this my heartfelt friend? When Ghost saw Lu Yi, she joked casually. Lu Yi had bought her fishing tackle and helped her solve her urgent need. However, this woman was also a pauper. The main reason was that she had gone bankrupt while playing with fish. As a result, she didn't have a planetary ship and could only take Pu Ku's. Lu Yi seriously suspected that this woman was very ugly. Otherwise, there was no reason for Pu Ku not to be tempted by such an enchanting woman. Lu Yi nodded at Spectre as a form of greeting. While Pu Ku was on his way, Lu Yi began to ask about the Constellation Hall. After his explanation, Lu Yi finally learned more about the Constellation Hall. Generally speaking, space wonders contain many hidden dangers. Any space wonder, even Rizhao, would be in danger if he rashly entered. Take the 10,000 Elephant Sea as an example. Usually, there were countless cultivators moving around there. There was indeed no danger. However, the 10,000 Elephant Sea itself was the most dangerous place. No one dared to enter it casually. The Constellation Hall was different. Usually, it just stood there motionlessly with its door tightly shut. There was no danger. This could be considered the Constellation Hall's dormant period. However, every few years, the Constellation Hall would open. When the door of the Constellation Hall opened, it meant that it had entered its active period. At this time, cultivators could enter the Constellation Hall and act according to its various rules. They could continue to obtain some substantial benefits. Whether it was space wonders or space treasures, they all had their own unique rules or rules. It was these rules that created the legends and reputation of space wonders and space treasures. Chapter 1403. The voice that Lu Yi heard previously was not a real voice. Instead, it was the resonance of thoughts caused by the mysterious energy waves when the Constellation Hall opened. In other words, the voice that Lu Yi heard sounded like that, but in other people's ears, it might sound different. Even the star beasts that did not have much intelligence could hear their own voice. When the majestic voice sounded, when the strange energy waves fluctuated, it was the most obvious sign that the Constellation Hall had opened. This created the spectacular scene of many constellations in the Wanxiang Sea and even the entire Wanxiang galaxy. The great ladle flew very quickly and steadily. The three of them nestled in the ladle. Although their vision was obstructed, there was a unique sense of peace. Pu Ku explained, and Gui Ling added from time to time. This allowed Lu Yi to gradually understand more about the rules of the Constellation Hall. After a few days, the great ladle slowly stopped. Lu Ye's divine telekinesis sensed clearly that the constellations that were hard to predict were gathered here. He immediately understood that they had arrived. The three of them came out of the ladle in a flash. Lu Yi looked up and saw an extremely shocking scene at a glance. In this starry sky, there was a huge palace. This was the famous Constellation Hall. It was named as a hall. From the outside, it was indeed a hall, but it was ridiculously huge. Its length and width were tens of thousands of miles, and its height was a few thousand miles. Outside the hall, heavenly pillars stood tall, giving off a boundless sense of majesty. Such a hall could not exist in any region. It was not that it could not be built, but that there was no need to build it. However, it had silently existed in this starry sky for tens of thousands of years. Of course, the Constellation Hall's size was only relative to the normal halls that people knew. As a starry sky wonder, its size was very small. Just compare it to the 10,000 Elephant Sea. If it was placed in the 10,000 Elephant Sea, it would at most be the size of a spiritual island. However, the strangeness and profoundness of a starry sky wonder could not be summed up by its size. From a certain perspective, although the Constellation Hall's reputation was not as good as the Wanxiang Sea, it was not far behind. There was a reason why it was so popular and loved by constellation cultivators. The hall was not solid. Instead, it gave off an ethereal feeling. It was as if the hall was not real, but a projection. Lu Yi finally understood why there were rumors that this thing had not fully evolved into a starry sky cardinal treasure. From the looks of it, it did have traces of a starry sky cardinal treasure. What was even stranger was that no matter which direction they faced the Constellation Palace, all they could see was the wide open door in the middle of the Constellation Palace. Usually this door was closed. Only when the Constellation Hall entered its active period would it be opened. No matter which direction the cultivators came from, they would all be facing the door. At this moment, there was a huge crowd outside the Constellation Hall. Lu Yi had never seen so many constellations gathered together. Although there were as many constellations as there were dogs in the myriad phenomenon sea, the constellations were all scattered due to the size of the myriad phenomenon sea. Unlike here, constellations from all directions had rushed over, and this was only a small portion. Some of the more impatient ones had already rushed into the constellation hall, some were still observing, and most were still on their way. It could be said that the appearance of the constellation hall had not only caused the constellations in the myriad phenomenon galaxy to boil over, but also the constellations of all the constellations that were connected to this place through the insect path. The wide open door was like the mouth of a beast, swallowing the figures that rushed in one by one and disappearing without a trace. "Let's go!" Ghost was more impatient. Seeing that Lu Yi and Pu Ku were still watching in a daze, she could not help but urge them, "What's there to see outside? You'll only know how exciting it is inside." As she said that, she grabbed one in each hand and rushed towards the door. The entire constellation hall was shrouded in a kind of hazy starlight, making it look ethereal and lofty. The mystery of the hazy starlight could not be seen from the outside, but when the three of them rushed into the area shrouded by the starlight, Ghost's figure clearly paused and she frowned. Not only her, but Pu Ku and all the other cultivators who rushed in were the same. It was as if they were suppressed by something in an instant. Lu Yi was very puzzled because although he could feel the suppression, it did not seem to have much effect on him, which made him puzzled. Putting aside their true strength in terms of cultivation, Pu Ku and Ghost were both at the late stage of the constellation hall, which was one level higher than him. It did not make sense for the two of them to be suppressed so obviously, while he felt like a cool breeze. Before he could figure it out, his vision turned black, and his entire person was shrouded in boundless darkness. The ghost's hand that was grabbing his arm had also disappeared. In this boundless darkness, he was the only one left. He did not panic because Pu Ku had told him about this before. This was a process that all cultivators who entered the constellation hall for the first time had to go through. There was a name for it, and it was called leaving a name imprint. Simply put, Lu Yi needed to leave his name so that it would be easier for some follow-up investigations and sequencing. A spot of light lit up in front of him, illuminating the area within a radius of 10 feet. The light was like a candle flame, swaying slightly. Following Pu Ku's previous instructions, Lu Yi raised his hand and touched the light. In an instant, he understood many things and understood the various rules of leaving a name imprint. It was basically the same as Pu Ku's introduction. It seemed that even cultivators who knew nothing about the Constellation Hall would quickly know what to do after coming here. What he needed to do now was very simple. He just needed to leave his name and aura in this light. This way, the Constellation Hall would record it. He did not necessarily need a real name, and he could even give himself a name at will. He would definitely not use the name Lu Yi. After leaving the Jade Conch Galaxy, he had been using the alias Li Tai Bai. It did not seem appropriate to use Li Tai Bai. He felt that he was not inferior to others in the competition at the Constellation realm. Therefore, if he really used this name and made a name for himself later, he would definitely attract the attention of many people, especially those big forces. When that time came, there would be no lack of trouble. The Constellation Hall was the place where Constellation Realm cultivators competed. It was also the place where many Constellation Realm cultivators relied on to make a name for themselves. The Wanxiang Galaxy was so big, and there were so many Constellation Realm cultivators. Whoever could make a name for themselves and amaze the world with a single feat would need a channel. Those Constellation cultivators who did not have any backing hoped to spread their wings in such an occasion and then be noticed and recruited by the big forces. The big forces were also keen to select the talents they admired in this grand occasion. Lu Yi was now all alone and did not want to be in the limelight. He was more interested in making a fortune in silence. Therefore, he had to use a fake name. How to name oneself was also particular. A name had to be either in line with one's personality or in line with one's ability. Lu Yi thought about himself. He had always been low-key and reserved, and he never acted ostentatiously. He was also a weapon cultivator who was passionate about wielding a saber and chopping with pure thoughts. Then the direction was very clear. With a thought, the light immediately recorded his name. Fa Wuzun. In the next moment, the light suddenly expanded and enveloped his entire person. Lu Yi faintly felt that he seemed to have some connection with something. He understood that the thing he was connected to should be the Constellation Hall. This was considered a success in leaving his name behind. The light slowly dissipated, and his vision blurred again. By the time Lu Yi reacted, he had already entered a large hall. The hall was very big, and there were many people. They were all constellation cultivators who had entered from outside. This was, without a doubt, the interior of the Constellation Hall. From the outside, the entire Constellation Hall seemed illusory and unreal. When it was not open, cultivators could casually pass through it without any obstruction or risk. However, once it entered its active period and opened, many mysteries would be revealed. The hall here was only one of them. As far as the eye could see, there were about 2,000 people gathered here. Compared to the spectacular scene outside the Constellation Hall previously, this number of people was simply insignificant. Of course, those gathered here were not all the cultivators who had entered the Constellation Hall. There were many halls like this in the Constellation Hall, and this was only one of them. Lu Yi looked up and saw a black stone tablet standing in the center of the hall. 3 large words were written on the top of the tablet. Contribution list. There were no words on the tablet for the time being, but after a period of time, some names would appear on it. They would all be elites who performed well in the Constellation Hall battle. Those large factions also used this contribution list to select talents. At this moment, a cultivator flew to the front of the stone tablet. After sizing it up, he suddenly threw a punch. This punch was powerful and heavy. When the punch was thrown, the entire hall hummed, but the contribution list did not move at all. Not even a crack appeared. However, this cultivator did not believe in heresy. He probably saw that the material of the contribution list was not ordinary and wanted to take a piece to sell. He kept urging his strength, throwing punches like rain. After attacking for a while without any effect, he suddenly revealed his true form in anger. Shockingly, it was a ferocious beast that Lu Yi could not recognize. It opened its mouth wide and gnawed at the black tablet. Lu Yi silently turned his head and continued to size up the surroundings. In this hall, other than the conspicuous contribution list black tablet in the center, there were many doors that led to unknown places at the edges of the hall. There was one at every interval. There were already impatient cultivators who rushed into these doors and disappeared. No one knew where they went. Looking up again, a huge number 56 on the dome was clearly visible. This number 56 was undoubtedly a number. In other words, this was the 56th hall. Before Lu Yi came in, there were already 55 halls full of people. If one hall could accommodate 2,000 people freely moving around and not feel crowded, over 100,000 Constellation Realm cultivators had already come in these few days. And this was only the beginning. There would definitely be more Constellation Realm cultivators coming after hearing the news. He did not dare to say more, but for such a grand event, at least 1 million Constellation Realm cultivators would participate. Just thinking about it was an extremely terrifying thing. End of chapter. Chapter 1404. Looking around, he didn't find Pu Ku and Yu Ling's figures. Those 2 fellows had probably been sent to the other halls, so there was no need to look for them. In this Constellation Hall, there was rarely a need to take the initiative to team up. Most of the time, it was the cultivators who worked alone. He had familiarized himself with the various rules of the Constellation Hall from Pu Ku and Gray Ling, but familiarity aside, he still had to experience it for himself. Lu Yi walked straight to a door and prepared to explore it. He thought for a moment before putting away his mountain plate saber and changing into a set of loose-fitting clothes. Speaking of which, these clothes weren't his own. His own clothes were the type that fit close to his body and made it easier for weapon cultivators to fight. These things could be considered spoils of war. Who knew which unlucky bastard it belonged to? The loose-fitting clothes added a scholarly and easygoing air to them. He stepped out and walked into the door. At the same time, he activated the 1,000-faced spirit inscriptions and changed his appearance. Since he had a fake name, he naturally had to change his appearance to prevent people who knew him from seeing through his disguise. Otherwise, if everyone knew that Fa Wuzuan was Li Taibai, then his disguise would be meaningless. As though he had passed through a thin membrane, some information inexplicably appeared in his mind. Lu Yi checked and found that the information pointed out what he needed to do next, the type of venue he would enter, and even the name of his opponent. It was very comprehensive. The source of the information was obviously the Constellation Hall. When Lu Ye's vision recovered, he was already standing on a floating continent. This should be a starry sky. Stars twinkled all around him, and there was also a dazzling sun in the distance. The floating continent wasn't small and was big enough for a constellation realm cultivator to move about. Lu Yi appeared at the edge of the floating continent. He immediately saw a person standing on the other side, about 50 kilometers away from him. It was a constellation called Xinjiang. This was his opponent this time, and this was also the simplest and most direct battle on the arena. There were all kinds of battles between cultivators in the Constellation Hall, and arena battles were just one of them. Generally speaking, when cultivators first entered the Constellation Hall and weren't completely familiar with the place, they would have to go through a few arena battles before they had the chance to encounter other scenes. Of course, the cultivators had no choice as to what they would encounter. Everything was governed by the rules of the Constellation Hall. On the surface, Qin Jiang looked like a young man about the same age as Lu Yi. His cultivation was also at the mid-stage. This was also the hidden rule of the Constellation Hall when arranging opponents. They would try their best to arrange cultivators with similar cultivation levels together. Only then could they compete. However, if a person only had cultivation but no strength, the rules of the Constellation Hall would adjust his opponent accordingly, and vice versa. All in all, the rules of the Constellation Hall were very mysterious and complicated. Over the years, the Constellation Hall had been opened many times. Generations of cultivators wanted to study the mysteries of this hall and find some rules from it so that they could benefit from it. However, they never found any valuable clues. 100 miles away, Qin Jiang stood still and glanced at Lu Yi from afar. He didn't take him seriously and began to familiarize himself with his new body. At the same time, he probed his surroundings. Lu Yi was doing the same thing. After all, this was the first time he was involved, and there were many things he needed to understand. On this point, the two who were arranged to be each other's opponents had a tacit understanding. Soon, Lu Yi discovered that he was completely fine. He was definitely here with his real body. At the same time, he also probed the range of this arena battle. This was the location of the floating continent. When he tried to fly out of the floating continent, he didn't succeed. There was an imperceptible barrier shrouding the surroundings, so he couldn't fly out at all. As for whether this was a location in the real starry sky or an internal space of the Constellation Hall, Lu Yi didn't know. He reckoned that the latter was more likely. On the other side, Qin Jiang had already circulated his spiritual power and moved his body to rush over. Judging from his attire and behavior, he clearly wasn't a magic cultivator. As for which sect he belonged to, Lu Yi couldn't figure it out. However, no matter which sect he belonged to, apart from magic cultivators, the other party needed to close the distance between them. Without any hesitation, he launched a spell technique. It was the fire dragon art, which he hadn't used in a long time. When the light lit up, Qin Jiang still had a look of disdain on his face. There was a reason why the Constellation Hall arranged the arena battle between the two of them was 50 miles long. This was because a mid-stage Constellation Hall cultivator couldn't reach this distance. Under normal circumstances, only a late-stage Constellation Hall cultivator could use a technique that could reach 50 miles and barely cause some damage. Thus, a 50-mile arena battle was enough for two mid-stage Constellation Hall cultivators to use. Qin Jiang naturally thought that Fa Wuzuan was just showing off. However, this kind of demonstration didn't have any practical effect other than wasting one's spiritual power. However, when the swaying fiery dragon pounced in front of him, Qin Jiang was shocked. He hurriedly steadied himself. With a furious roar, his qi and blood surged, and he threw a punch forward. This guy didn't look burly, but he walked the path of a body cultivator. He didn't choose to dodge, because dodging was meaningless. Cultivators could control spiritual power outside their bodies when they were at the Cloud River tier, let alone at the Constellation tier. Even if he could dodge the fiery dragon for a moment, Lu Yi could continue to control the fiery dragon to chase after him. The flames exploded, and the fiery dragon disappeared. Qin Jiang only felt a scorching heat envelop him, and his body couldn't help but sway. His face was filled with shock, because at this moment, he was more than 70 miles away from his opponent. This kind of attack range was not something a mid-stage Constellation Hall cultivator could possess, especially when the opponent's technique didn't weaken much even though it was so far away. In other words, this Fa Wuzuan's attack range was far more than 70 miles. It could be 50 miles, or even farther. Looking at the big picture, Qin Jiang immediately understood that he had encountered an incredible opponent in this first battle. Just as he was about to adjust his body and attack again, in his field of vision, another fiery dragon arrived, followed by a second, a third. After the 3 fiery dragons, there were also a lot of messy spell techniques mixed in, and they looked like fireworks of different colors. What the F***CK Qin Jiang couldn't help but curse, but he was someone who had cultivated to the mid-stage Constellation Hall, after all, and naturally wouldn't admit defeat so easily. With a roar, he summoned his own protective spiritual treasure to protect himself, his face full of humiliation. For a body cultivator, being forced to use a protective spiritual treasure right from the start was undoubtedly a very humiliating thing. Facing the many techniques, he rushed forward like a wolf. The further he went, the greater the pressure. When he was 50 miles away, he couldn't go any further. As Lu Yi unleashed another round of techniques, a sky full of light shrouded his body. When the light dissipated, Qin Jiang was already gone. He wasn't dead, Lu Yi could feel it. He just admitted defeat and left. In the competition in the Constellation Hall, you were allowed to admit defeat. As long as you shouted when you felt something was wrong, you would be able to leave in a breath's time. Most of the time, your life was not in danger. Of course, there were also those who shouted too late and died in vain. After the first battle, Lu Yi waited patiently. A ball of spiritual light suddenly appeared out of thin air and fell on him, enveloping his entire body. This was the winner's reward. The spiritual light contained extremely pure starry sky energy, which could be easily refined and absorbed by Constellation Hall cultivators without any harm. This reward was the reason why countless Constellation Halls enthusiastically participated in this grand event. This was because no matter how low one's cultivation was, as long as one won a battle here, there would be benefits. Otherwise, why would so many Constellation Halls be so eager to come here? Every time the Constellation Hall opened, many Constellation Halls would be accompanied by the fall of many Constellation Halls, including many monstrous geniuses from top domains. This reward was one of the important reasons for Lu Yi to participate. Another reason was that he had been cultivating behind closed doors for too long. Ever since he came to the Wanxiang Sea and advanced to the mid-stage Constellation Hall, he had basically not fought with anyone. For cultivators, blindly increasing one's cultivation was not enough, especially for someone like Lu Yi. Ever since he stepped onto the path of cultivation, he had been fighting with humans, the insect clan, and the blood clan. It could be said that his previous cultivation was basically a path of slaughter. Suddenly losing the opportunity to fight with others, Lu Yi was really not used to it. In particular, there were guests from all over the Wanxiang Sea. There were all kinds of major races, and it was a good place to experience the means of each race. However, he could not just randomly pick a passerby to spar with them. That would only offend them for no reason. The sudden opening of the Constellation Hall was undoubtedly a rare opportunity. By participating in this grand event, he could openly spar with different Constellation Halls, experience their strength, and feel their means. Lu Yi believed that after this Constellation Hall battle, even if his cultivation did not increase, his knowledge and experience would be greatly enriched. Sensing the spiritual light enveloping his body, he could sense the purity of the energy within. Lu Yi activated the power of his talent tree and quickly absorbed it completely. Not bad, the effect was about the same as devouring 10 spirit jades. He had a huge advantage in this aspect. Even if an ordinary Constellation Hall won, It would probably take 2 to 4 hours to refine and absorb this energy. However, he completed it in a dozen breaths. The remaining time was enough for him to participate in more battles and obtain more benefits. Furthermore, with every victory, one would gain a point. That was the purpose of the points ranking. The cultivators would be ranked according to the number of points they obtained. Before the Constellation Hall closed, all the cultivators on the points ranking would be able to obtain additional rewards. This meant that Lu Yi, who had the innate skill tree, would have a far greater advantage than others in terms of absorbing and refining the profound light of victory or the number of chips he obtained. This was because his speed and frequency of absorption were something that others could not match. The moment the spiritual light on the surface of his body disappeared, Lu Yi returned to the hall. However, when he looked up, he did not appear in hall number 56 this time, but hall number 63. There was no difference, just a different location. Without stopping, Lu Yi turned and walked toward the door at the side. End of chapter. Chapter 1405. Battle, defeat the enemy, refine the mystic light. The cycle repeated. In the following days, Lu Yi continued with this process. He could fight at least 20 rounds with others every day. With every victory, he would receive a mystic light as a reward. Casually refining it was equivalent to swallowing 10 spiritual jades. In other words, in this Constellation Hall, he refined at least 200 spiritual jades every day. This was the result of half a month of normal cultivation. He could clearly feel that his cultivation was steadily increasing. The most obvious sign was the increase in the refinement of his bone marrow essence. For someone like him, the opening of the Constellation Hall was definitely a good opportunity to rapidly increase his cultivation. Even if the others were not as efficient as him, they would have no problem fighting 4 or 5 rounds. No matter which race's constellation, the consumption of spiritual jades could not reach 40 to 50 in a day. And this was the reward for defeating a mid-stage constellation's early stage. Lu Yi heard from Pu Ku that if he defeated a late-stage constellations, the reward would be even more generous. Unfortunately, he did not meet any in these few days. Because the opponents that the Constellation Hall arranged for him were all mid-stage constellations. Not to mention late-stage, there was not even an early-stage constellations. With his current strength, these opponents with the same cultivation as him, no matter which sect they belonged to, were all kept at a distance of 25 kilometers. Only a mid-stage constellation's foundation was not bad. With the help of a powerful defensive spiritual treasure, he advanced to a distance of 40 kilometers. In the end, he still fell short. After a few days, Lu Yi finally met a late-stage constellation's opponent. This should be the Constellation Hall's rules automatically adjusted. Because Lu Yi won the previous battles too easily, the Constellation Hall's rules had already determined that he had late-stage strength. Naturally, they would arrange a corresponding opponent for him. This was expected, but it still could not stop Lu Yi's invincibility. As early as the early-stage constellation, Lu Yi could already compete with the late-stage constellations of the dwarf race. Although the dwarf race's constellation's foundation was slightly weaker than the other races due to their own reasons, late-stage constellation was still late-stage. Their cultivation could not be faked. Now that Lu Yi's cultivation had increased considerably compared to before, it was naturally easy for him to deal with ordinary late-stage constellations. The only difference was that the late-stage constellation's distance he met was slightly further, but they were unable to get any closer than 10 kilometers. There were also those who exchanged spells with him from dozens of kilometers away, but they were also beaten into submission. In terms of the orthodox Tao of spells, Lu Yi was naturally inferior to the orthodox Tao cultivators. After all, they had been immersed in this Tao for many years. Lu Yi's casting of spells basically relied on the spirit patterns on the talent tree, as well as the various experiences he had obtained when imprinting the dragon soaring realm's origin. Therefore, he couldn't use any profound techniques. What he used were all very simple techniques. However, he was able to use them at a very high frequency, and his attack range was very far. His spiritual energy was purer than that of a normal person, so his techniques were much more lethal. Quite a few powerful magic cultivators had been defeated in such a muddle-headed manner. After many battles, Lu Yi gained many benefits. At the same time, his horizons were broadened. In the battle for the deity Sea on the reincarnation tree, Lu Yi had seen the unique abilities of many races, but he hadn't fought many people there. However, it was different this time. Every day, he had to fight many battles with people. There were all kinds of races in the starry sky, and they would do anything to win. In this kind of situation, it was hard not to open his eyes. Another battle began. The arena was a stretch of ruins, with dilapidated walls and dilapidated walls. It was extremely desolate, like the scene after a powerful sect was destroyed. When Lu Yi appeared, he quickly sensed his opponent, a late-stage constellation cultivator called Wei Yijin. When their divine senses clashed, Wei Yijin's body had already turned into sword light, and he rushed towards Lu Yi. His actions were straightforward, very much like a sword cultivator's straightforward demeanor. Lu Yi stood in place calmly as usual, facing the direction of his opponent's attack, and raised his hand to cast a fire dragon technique. Several dozen kilometers away, Wei Yijin's sword light swayed slightly, easily avoiding the fire dragon technique's attack, and continued to close the distance. Under Lu Ye's control, the fire dragon technique that had hit empty air turned around and chased after him. At the same time, a new fire dragon was launched. Wei Yijin's speed was undoubtedly very fast. After all, he was a sword cultivator and could easily dodge the incoming fire dragons. In the blink of an eye, there were several fire dragons following behind him. Looking from afar, the fire dragons seemed to be his own method, bringing with them the power of thunder as they pounced towards Lu Yi, their momentum aggressive. Lu Yi instantly understood this guy's plan. The other party obviously didn't want to waste his spiritual power to block his fire dragons, and only wanted to get rid of him. Because as long as he got rid of him, no matter how many fire dragons there were, they would be useless without anyone controlling them. As the sword cultivator with the most ferocious killing power, his actions undoubtedly showed his powerful self-confidence. Lu Yi could keep people at bay before because they had to block his technique. If they didn't block and only dodged, Lu Yi couldn't force them. In the blink of an eye, the distance between them was only 15 kilometers. Looking at the other party's posture, he would probably reach him in 2 breaths. If a true spell cultivator was closed in by a sword cultivator to this extent, he would have already lost. Because at this distance, the other party would be able to use all his techniques. The sword light on Wei Yijin's body suddenly brightened, and with a clear sword cry, sword light filled the sky. It was also at this moment that a large number of techniques suddenly formed in front of Lu Yi. Fire dragons, fire phoenixes, golden arcs, flame flames, water swords, leaf dances, and so on. Wei Yijin, who was in the middle of a thunderous attack, was stunned. He was a late-stage star constellation cultivator, with a lifespan of several hundred years, and had fought countless people in his life. He had also seen many different kinds of spell cultivators, but this was the first time he saw someone who could cast techniques so quickly. Even if these techniques were the most basic and simple techniques, what was even stranger was that these techniques were of various attributes. The moment the spell was formed, it rushed towards Wei Yijin from all directions. He frowned, and in that instant of hesitation he made a decision. Only attack and not defend. The sword light that filled the sky turned into a long river, slanting towards Lu Ye's location. The brilliant power caused the entire battle space to tremble. Lu Ye's figure was immediately drowned by the sword light. Along with him, Wei Yijin was also drowned. The many techniques that Lu Yi had used just now, and the fire dragons that were chasing him directly attacked him from the front and back. The sword light retracted, and the light of the techniques dissipated. Lu Yi appeared in his original position, unharmed. On the surface of his body, the light of the holy protection spirit patterns slowly disappeared. It had to be said that the killing power of a sword cultivator was truly strong. When the sword light covered the sky, even if Lu Yi relied on the newly deduced holy protection to protect himself, several layers were still scraped off. If it was a normal person, they could only rely on their defensive spirit treasure to block, unable to dodge. A cold killing intent locked onto him. In the blink of an eye, the slightly battered Wei Yijin was already charging over with a sword river. Lu Yi was unharmed, but he was not. Compared to the killing power that spread through the starry sky, the defense of a sword cultivator was never much, especially when he only attacked and did not defend himself just now. A cold voice sounded. I was wondering why I encountered a middle-stage cultivator. So you really do have this kind of ability. When he had discovered that Lu Ye's cultivation was only at the middle stage of the constellation realm, Wei Yijin had already been on guard. In a place like the Constellation Palace, if he encountered a cultivator with a lower cultivation than himself, he definitely should not be happy too early, because the other party was very likely not arranged to be here because they were weak, but because they were strong enough. Wei Yijin had only heard of such a thing, but he had not expected to encounter it himself. Just now, it had only been a simple exchange of blows, but it had already allowed him to determine the strength of his opponent. But sword cultivators were not afraid. It could even be said that the stronger the opponent, the more it could stimulate his fighting spirit. His voice continued, but your name is too big, I'm afraid you won't be able to handle it. Dharma supremacy, Dharma supremacy, Dharma supremacy, Dharma supremacy, Dharma supremacy, clearly meant this. So Wei Yijin felt that this guy was definitely an arrogant and savage person. This kind of person's strength was not weak, but that was all there was to it. Fa Wuzuan was still using spells to attack. However, under Jian He's powerful attack, his spells couldn't do anything. In the blink of an eye, Jian He was not far from Lu Yi. It looked like he was about to be enveloped by Jian He. However, a scene that made Wei Yijin feel astonished appeared. Almost at the instant the sword river was about to reach him, a pitch-black saber suddenly appeared in Dharma Supremacy's hand, and then he crashed into the sword river. The bright saber light exploded like a sun, extremely aggressive and ruthless aura sweeping in all directions, actually making his aura somewhat unstable. The sword river formed by boundless sword energy instantly melted like snowflakes under the sun, starting to melt from the place where the strong enemy had charged in. Compared to the other's calmness and gentleness when using spells just now, this Dharma supremacy was like a mad dog that had been let out of a cage. Wei Yijin immediately understood one thing. This Dharma supremacy looked like a Dharma cultivator, and also did things like a Dharma cultivator, but in reality, he was a weapon cultivator. He actually encountered this kind of person. Wei Yijin was speechless. He had also heard that some people would hide their true sect, pretending to be from another sect, but this kind of disguise was mostly superficial. Once they fought, it was easy to be exposed, because a cultivator's energy was limited and it was impossible for them to achieve success in two different sections. But he had not noticed anything strange before, until this Dharma supremacy took the initiative to reveal himself. Dharma supremacy's disguise as a Dharma cultivator was enough for him to take him seriously. Now that he had revealed his true abilities, he immediately felt the pressure. When the sword river collapsed, two figures appeared, Dharma supremacy's saber light and sword energy wreaking havoc, their figures moving about, locked in a fierce battle. This was an eye-opener for Wei Yijin. He had heard of two situations before, and now he saw them in one go. Lu Yi also had the same feeling. He had heard Pu Ku say before that some Constellation Realm cultivators clearly had the qualifications to advance to Yu Yao, but they kept delaying it. They were waiting for the Constellation Hall to open, because if they could leave their names on the Constellation Hall ranking, they would be able to obtain many benefits. End of chapter. Chapter 1406. This was especially true for the constellations from the top realms. They were willing to wait a few more years for a better future and greater benefits. Of course, there were also many constellations that could not advance to the Yu Yao realm and wanted to use the final reward from the Constellation Hall to break through their bottleneck. But no matter what, these two types of people had already reached the limit of the Constellation realm and were the strongest in this realm. Especially the former type of people, their strength was not something an ordinary late-stage constellation cultivator could compare to. There were many obstacles in a cultivator's life. The first obstacle was to open the spiritual cavities. Only when one opened a certain number of spiritual cavities could one be qualified to advance to the Cloud River realm and have the capital to aspire to a higher realm. Otherwise, one would not be able to go far just by advancing to the Cloud River realm. The Cloud River realm and the True Lake realm did not have many bottlenecks. When one's cultivation reached a certain level, the realm would naturally advance. But then, advancing from the True Lake to the Deity Ocean was another major obstacle because of the birth of the Deity Ocean. Not every True Lake could give birth to a Deity Ocean. Those who could not give birth to a Deity Ocean and nurture a soul avatar could only stagnate. In the future, the bottleneck of advancing from the Deity Ocean to the Constellation Realm was not difficult. The difficult part was competing with others for this opportunity. Every large realm had a limit to the number of constellations that could be born in a certain period of time. The strength of the realm's foundation also varied. Take the 9 states for example. As the foundation of the realm increased, it became easier for cultivators to cultivate. In the future, there would be many Deity Ocean cultivators, but there were only so many places to advance to the Constellation Realm. The Deity Ocean cultivators would definitely fight for it. But advancing from the Constellation Realm to the Yu Yao Realm was another major obstacle because it involved the transformation of spiritual power. This was related to the foundation that the cultivator had built in the past. Take the Qingli Dao Realm, where Tang Jun came from, as an example. For more than 3,000 years, there were many constellations. But until now, there were only 3 Yu Yao. Qin Yuandai was killed by Lu Ye's red talisman. Now that Tang Jun was in the Wanxiang Sea, there was only one Wu Zhuo left in the Qingli Dao realm. The situation in the Qingli Dao realm was more special. But no matter what, advancing from the Constellation realm to the Yu Yao realm was not easy. Lu Yi did not know what kind of person Wei Yijin was, but he guessed that he was the kind of person who could advance to the Yu Yao realm but did not. In the face of such a powerhouse, it was no longer possible for Lu Yi to win by relying solely on his spells. Thus, Lu Yi made the prompt decision to bring out his true abilities. In comparison, Wei Yijin's strength was much stronger than Zhao Tianmu's. This battle was in full swing, and Wei Yijin's various mysterious methods and powerful attacks caused Lu Yi to suffer a lot. After a full hour, Wei Yijin took the initiative to admit defeat and leave. Lu Ye's close combat forced him to maintain a high level of explosive power. After a long time, he found it difficult to continue. Moreover, he could feel that even if he still had enough spiritual energy, he was no match for Fa Wuzuan. Because in the fierce battle, he had slowly fallen into a disadvantageous position. He didn't say anything, and only took a deep look at his opponent, as if he wanted to remember his appearance in his heart. When Wei Yijin's figure dissipated, a mass of profound light fell from the sky. As expected, there was no change in the benefits he obtained from activating the talent tree. It was the same as when he was dealing with the other Constellation Hall advanced stage cultivators. It was only equivalent to him refining 20 spirit jades. Defeating a middle stage cultivator was equivalent to refining 10 pieces, while defeating a late stage cultivator was equivalent to refining 20 pieces. However, the amount of time and energy required was greater, so it was hard to say which situation would give him more benefits. Returning to the hall, Lu Yi casually found a place to rest and reorganize. He didn't need to worry about being ambushed here, because as long as he entered the hall, everyone would be under the protection of the Constellation Hall. A few days later, the hall was still as lively as before. Some people even set up stalls here, selling healing pills and recovery pills. The price was naturally more expensive than normal, but if one wanted to return to the Wanxiang Sea to buy them, they would need to hurry and waste a lot of time. Therefore, if a cultivator needed something, they would choose to buy it here. It was said that the hall numbered 88 was the most lively, because many people had set up stalls there. Even the Wanxiang Chamber of Commerce had a stall there. As long as one greeted them, they could have whatever they wanted delivered. That large hall had also become a large hall for cultivators to trade. The cultivators that came and went were all there to buy and sell things. After a short rest, Lu Yi continued on his journey. Although the Constellation Hall would be open for a long time, it was a rare opportunity, so he naturally had to cherish it. In the next few days, Lu Yi kept going back and forth between the various battle arenas and the Constellation Hall. Every day he gained a lot. It could be said that he had experienced hundreds of battles and had never been defeated. The cultivators he encountered were basically all late-stage Constellation Realm cultivators, and most of them were ordinary late-stage Constellation Realm cultivators. Only a few of them were like Wei Yijin. Every time he encountered this kind of person, Lu Yi was forced to use his true abilities to win. There was even one battle that could be said to be a Pyrrhic victory. The strength of the opponent in that battle was almost the same as Wei Yijin, but the opponent had a spirit treasure with unfathomable power. In that battle, Lu Yi was almost heavily injured. This experience secretly reminded him that in terms of pure strength, he might not lose to any of the Constellation Realm cultivators, but cultivators didn't just rely on their own strength. There were also some unpredictable external forces, especially spirit treasures, which had all kinds of strange powers. The slightest bit of carelessness could cause one to fall into the opponent's trap. After cultivating to the Constellation Realm, who didn't have a few suitable spirit treasures in their hands, especially those fellows who came from peak forces, the power of their spirit treasures was especially great. However, after fighting with people many times, Lu Yi also discovered one thing. Even with the same cultivation, the difference in strength between cultivators was also very large. Some people clearly had extraordinary cultivation, but lacked battle experience, so they appeared to be unable to withstand a single blow. Half a month after the Constellation Hall opened, when Lu Yi returned from another battle, he shockingly discovered that in the hall, a group of people were gathered around the ranking board, watching from the sidelines. Looking up, Lu Yi suddenly understood. There were changes in the ranking board. All along, this thing had been a blank black tablet, but everyone knew that some names would eventually be recorded on it. It was just that the time had never been up. Until today, it was finally revealed. A voice was heard. "What's up with these people? How can their accumulations be so high? I'm actually not even a fraction of their total." Someone said, "These people all have extraordinary backgrounds. Their cultivation has already reached perfection in the Constellation Realm, so they don't need to refine their profound light. They only need to battle, which naturally saves time." This conjecture was reasonable and was undoubtedly convincing, because the time a cultivator spent in the Constellation Hall could be divided into 3 categories. The first category was naturally the time spent fighting others. The second category was the time spent refining profound light. The third category was the time spent recuperating from injuries. In comparison, refining the profound light took a lot of time. Several hours had passed in the blink of an eye. Like Wei Yijin, who could casually advance to Yu Yao's Constellation Realm, he didn't need to refine profound light. At most, after a great battle, he would casually refine it to recover the spiritual power he had expended. This way, he would naturally save a lot of time, and he could participate in more battles, which meant he had a chance to obtain more chips. On the ranking board, the top 10 had accumulated more than 300 chips, and the highest was even close to 400. In other words, he had won as many battles as he had accumulated in this half a month. Below the top 10 and within the top 20, they all had around 300 chips. The difference wasn't great. Only after reaching the top 100 did the number of chips fluctuate slightly. Lu Yi looked up to search for his name on the ranking board, and quickly found Fa Wuzuan. He was tied with 2 other people at the 15th place. This was within his expectations. He didn't think that he would definitely be able to get first place just because he had the advantage of the talent tree. Just as that person had said, many people didn't need to refine the profound light. No matter how fast he refined it, it would still take some time. Others could save this time and accumulate it. Naturally, they would participate in more battles than he did, and the accumulated points would undoubtedly be more. He had never underestimated others. The ranking board didn't just record the cultivator's name, the number of chips they had accumulated, and their winning percentage. For the time being, the top 100 cultivators' winning percentage was basically 100%. Only Wei Yijin and a few other familiar names, Lu Yi, were at 99%. They were quite eye-catching. If nothing unexpected happened, Their winning percentages were all taken down by Lu Yi. As he watched, the names on the ranking board flickered continuously. Some rose, some fell, and some fell completely off the ranking board. There were at least 1 million constellations participating in such a grand event, but only 1,000 names were recorded on the ranking board. Therefore, cultivators outside of the top 1,000 couldn't leave their names on the ranking board. Lu Yi was temporarily ranked 15th. After observing for a while, he had already fallen to 17th. He wasn't in a hurry. This was just the beginning. The Constellation Hall could still be maintained for a while. Only at the end would it be time to truly fight for a ranking. According to the rules of the Constellation Hall, before the end he didn't even need to maintain a high ranking. He only needed to leave his name on the ranking board. Therefore, the number of battles he fought now wouldn't affect his final ranking much. However, every victory would bring him benefits. Naturally, the more battles he fought, the better. After resting for a while, Lu Yi turned around and stepped into a nearby door. As usual, a piece of information appeared in his mind. After a brief investigation, Lu Yi was slightly startled. He had been competing with others for half a month. This time, he finally encountered something different. When his vision recovered, Lu Yi found himself on a desolate planet. The environment wasn't bad, but it was devoid of life. Everything he saw was desolate. There was no one around. He used his divine sense to investigate, but he didn't find any valuable information. However, a lively voice suddenly appeared in his mind. "Where is everyone? Let's find a place to gather." End of chapter. Chapter 1407. The competition in the Constellation Palace was not just a form of fighting in the arena. There were many strange scenes, and Lu Yi already knew this. Swish. Cultivators passed through the door and entered the place of competition. What kind of situation they would encounter and what kind of scene they would enter was beyond their control. Everything was operated by the rules of the Constellation Palace. For half a month, Lu Yi had always encountered the form of fighting in the arena, and the opponents he encountered were all alone. But this time was obviously different. This time, it was a competition between many people. As the jumping voice sounded in his mind, Lu Yi could clearly sense the existence of the other 4 people. This was not the perception of spirit sense, nor was it the observation of the naked eye. It was an ability given to him by the Constellation Palace. As long as he was still in this scene, he could easily sense the general location of the 4 people, and at the same time, he could easily establish some contact with them. These 4 people were his temporary companions. Swish. In other words, in this competition, the 5 of them were in the same group. They needed to temporarily join forces and advance and retreat together. This was a test for anyone. It was very difficult for cultivators to cooperate with strangers, because people's hearts were unpredictable and they could not trust each other. But in such a place, in such a scene, the 5 of them had to work together. Because they had enemies, and the enemies were also in a group of 5. As for how many groups there were, Lu Yi did not know. This was not mentioned in the information given by the Constellation Palace when they came in. So on this desolate planet, other than Lu Ye's group of 5, there were at least 5 other people, perhaps 10, 15, or even 20 being here. The most urgent thing for everyone to do was to find a place to gather. Only by gathering could they huddle together for warmth. As the jumping voice sounded, another woman's gentle voice sounded. "Then let's find a place to gather? One person does not move, and the other 4 gather. How about that?" Without a map, they could not accurately provide the location information. This method was the most practical and best. This was undoubtedly an experienced suggestion. If he was not wrong, this woman should have experienced such a competition before. Swish. Another energetic voice rang out. "Sure. Then, who should we gather to?" Lu Yi didn't say anything. He still spread his spirit sense out and scanned the surroundings. Finally, a slightly old voice sounded. "This old man is old, and his legs are inconvenient. Everyone, please show the virtue of respecting the old and loving the young. Come closer to this old man, and be careful along the way. Don't expose your tracks." A lively voice replied, Then we'll listen to the old man. The others had no objections, and Lu Yi immediately moved towards the location of the old voice's owner. However, before he approached, he had to determine the specific location of the old voice. Although he could sense the general location of his 4 temporary companions, he had no idea who they corresponded to. However, when one of them did not move and the other 4 moved, it was easy to judge. Soon, Lu Yi sensed that the other 3 temporary companions, including himself, were all gathering in a certain location. That location was undoubtedly the location of the owner of the old voice. A moment later, while Lu Yi was still hurrying along, a shout suddenly rang out in his mind. It was none other than Yang Kai's vigorous voice. "Everyone, I was ambushed and injured. I can't get away. Who can help me? How many enemies are there?" A woman's weak voice sounded. 2, 1 late stage and 1 middle stage. This late stage is so strong I can't take it. Before he could finish his words, Lu Yi sensed that the person had disappeared without a trace. Clearly, he hadn't been killed, but had voluntarily admitted defeat and left this place. Lu Yi didn't stop and continued forward with a calm expression. They hadn't even gathered yet and they had already lost one of their members. This was undoubtedly a bad start, but it wasn't a big problem. This wasn't the end. As that person left, the old voice sounding a little helpless. "Everyone, this old man has to leave too. I subdued a life beast pet a few days ago, but it suddenly went on a rampage for some reason. This old man has to deal with it." After that, Lu Yi sensed that the old man had disappeared. He immediately stopped in his tracks. They had originally agreed to move toward the old man's location, but now that he had left, there was no need to move forward. The 5 of them had joined forces, but this was just the beginning. One of them was sent flying, and the other left because of his life beast pet. In an instant, they had lost 2 members, leaving only 3. Lu Yi didn't expect to be so unlucky in his first experience of such a situation. The teammates that Constellation Hall had arranged for him were really a little unreliable. The old man was clearly dumbfounded. What do we do now?" The woman also let out a long sigh. The sorrow in her sigh could make people feel bitter even from far away. Receiving no response, the old man spoke again. "No matter what you do, I'm going to persevere until the end. I can't just admit defeat and leave without even fighting. That's too outrageous." "What's your cultivation?" the woman asked weakly. "Early stage." "Oh, then I'm a little stronger than you. I'm at the mid-stage." The woman's voice was still as weak as ever. Speaking of this, she spoke in a straightforward manner without the slightest hint of complacency. Anyone who heard her voice would be able to imagine the image of a woman who was as gentle as water and had a delicate body. Forget about the mid-stage or early stage. What do we do now? Wait, there's still a fellow Taoist who hasn't spoken at all. He can't be a mute, right? Fellow Taoist, do you have any good suggestions? Lu Yi pondered for a moment, then transmitted his voice. "Find a hidden place and don't move. We'll come find you." "Why don't I move? Are you looking down on me? Are you afraid that I'll be exposed? Let me tell you, although my cultivation isn't high, I have treasures with me. You might not be able to compare to me when it comes to concealing myself. Then don't move, female fellow Taoist." Lu Yi couldn't be bothered to argue with her and immediately changed his mind. The woman was very obedient. Hearing this, she landed and looked around for a hidden place, then hid herself obediently. Lu Yi moved forward peacefully. About half an hour later, he finally arrived at the place where the woman was. This was a desolate mountain valley with traces of concealing arrays. When Lu Yi arrived, the woman obviously sensed him and took the initiative to open a gap in the array. Lu Yi flashed in. At a glance, he saw 2 figures. One was an acquaintance. It was Chu Shen, the young master of the Thousand Sunset sect in Che Ling realm. No wonder his voice sounded a little familiar. He was obviously released. Thinking about it, the opening of the Constellation Hall was such a great opportunity. As a native cultivator of the Wanxiang Galaxy, how could Chu Shen miss it? No matter how reluctant Zhiyan Rizhao was, he knew that flowers in a greenhouse would not grow up. The Constellation Hall was undoubtedly a place where people could quickly broaden their horizons and accumulate battle experience. If they missed this opportunity, it would be difficult for them to have such an opportunity again. He said before that he had treasures with him, which Lu Yi believed. He almost fell for this guy's trick back then. Chu Shun was closer to this place, so he naturally arrived earlier than Lu Yi. Standing next to Chu Shen was a woman who looked delicate and weak. She was extremely beautiful, but for some reason she gave people a feeling of pity, as if she had encountered something sad. Lu Yi even saw a look of self-blame in her eyes, but he didn't know what she was blaming herself for. Lu Yi took a few more glances at her, not because she was beautiful, but because of the symmetrical lines on her smooth and delicate cheeks. These lines were obviously natural. Not only did they not ruin her dainty appearance, but they also added a sense of mystery. Sensing the aura on her body, Lu Yi immediately understood that this woman was not from the human race, but the monster race. He just didn't know what her true body was. This was not easy to find out, especially for a monster race woman who had taken human form. The secret of her true body would not be easily revealed, otherwise it would be easy for others to target her. Inside the concealment formation, after Chu Shun confirmed that Lu Ye's cultivation was only at the middle stage constellation realm, he couldn't help but sigh. Unreliable, unreliable. The original lineup of 5 had already lost 2 members. If Lu Yi was at the late stage constellation realm, he might be able to put up a fight, but now he found that Lu Yi was only at the middle stage, the same cultivation as the woman. 2 middle stage and 1 early stage gathered together. What could they do? Even if he had many treasures, in a battle between cultivators, strength was the foundation. He did have a treasure like the red talisman, but in this kind of battle, he couldn't use the red talisman. However, although Chu Shen was young, there was one good thing about him, and that was that he was indomitable. He quickly collected his emotions and didn't realize that his cultivation was the lowest. He said casually, "Since we're going to fight side by side, we should at least get familiar with each other. Let's exchange our names? It's also convenient for us to address each other." The woman clasped her hands in front of her abdomen, twirling her thumbs, and quickly nodded. Chu Shen coughed lightly and cupped his fists. "Greetings, senior brothers and sisters. I'm called Domineering Side." Lu Ye's expression didn't change. The main thing was that in this half a month, he had seen all kinds of strange names, so he was used to it. He wasn't the only one who used an alias to participate in the Constellation Palace battle. Those cultivators who wanted to make a name for themselves and then be recruited by the major forces would use their real names to do things. This way, it would be easier for them to make a name for themselves. However, there were also many people who didn't want to reveal their real names, or deliberately hid them. Furthermore, the Constellation Palace had a rule of naming themselves at will, so naturally, a large number of strange names emerged. Domineering Side was still considered normal. Lu Yi even saw a guy called Weapon Cultivators eat shit while growing up. In that battle, he beat him up very badly. Lu Yi turned to look at the delicate woman beside him. The woman's voice was as soft as a mosquito. "I'm called Unrivaled Lucky Star." Blushing like blood, Lu Yi nodded slightly. "Fei Wuzuan." The 3 people who used aliases looked at each other, and the atmosphere was silent for a moment. Chapter 1408. Suddenly, Chu Shen seemed to remember something and looked at Lu Yi in shock. "You are Fei Wuzuan? The Fei Wuzuan on the chip's ranking?" He must have seen the chip's ranking before coming in. Hearing this, Lucky Star couldn't help but look at Lu Yi. But soon, Chu Shen shook his head. "I must have made a mistake. There is someone with the same name as you on the chip's ranking, and his ranking is very high." The reason for this was because Lu Ye's cultivation was only at the mid-stage of the constellation realm. Of the people who left their names on the chip's ranking, which one wasn't at the late stage? Even if there were mid-stage, there were very few of them. As for early stage, there wasn't even a single one. Having the same name wasn't an exception. Take his domineering name for example. There were so many constellations, so there must be someone with the same name as him. Not to mention the same alias, there were many people who had the same name. In the end, there were too many cultivators participating in the Constellation Palace competition. In Chu Shen's opinion, a mid-stage cultivator definitely wouldn't have the chance to leave his name on the chip's ranking, let alone such a high position. Let's discuss what to do next. Chu Shen said, "Gentlemen, on my way here, I sense some people fighting. So this time, we will definitely face more than one team. There are at least 2 or even more teams. Right now, our team only has 3 people left. Even if we don't win in the end, we have to at least hold on for a while. It's best if we can eliminate some of our opponents so that we can gain more benefits." In this kind of competition, the number of opponents eliminated and how long they could hold on would directly affect the final chip's ranking and the Mystic Light reward. In addition, there was another rule in this kind of competition. If you hid for a long time and didn't fight, your location would be marked by the Constellation Palace. At that time, you wouldn't be able to hide. This was to prevent people who were proficient in concealment from using their advantage to avoid fighting. If that was the case, then it wouldn't be a fair victory. So, who will be in charge of the 3 of us first? A team needs a backbone after all. Chu Shen continued. This was a reasonable suggestion. If there was a late-stage Constellation Realm cultivator here, then the late stage would naturally be in charge. The others wouldn't have any objections. But with 2 mid-stage and 1 early stage, who would be in charge? Lucky Star hurriedly waved his hand. "I'll listen to you." This woman didn't seem to have a mind of her own. Chu Shen looked at Lu Yi and recommended himself. "Dao brother, is there a problem if I make the decision? TSK, don't look at how my cultivation is lower than yours by a level, but I have many treasures. If we're really talking about strength, an average mid-stage Constellation Realm cultivator might not be able to defeat me." These words were a little too modest. Lu Yi had tried out his methods before, and knew that the average mid-stage Constellation Realm cultivator would definitely not be his match. Other things aside, just the mystic light from that mirror alone was impossible to guard against. Of course, if you have any suggestions, we can discuss them as soon as possible. Chu Shen's attitude was very sincere. Lu Yi was about to respond when he suddenly sensed something and quickly shouted, "Enemy attack!" As soon as he finished speaking, there was a violent fluctuation of spiritual energy, and the earth shook. Then, a fierce aura descended from the sky. The array formation here was set up by the Lucky Star. Although it had some protective effects, it was not very strong. It was mainly used for concealment. He didn't know why he was so unlucky to be discovered and immediately attacked. The instant the array formation collapsed, 2 auras imprinted into Lu Ye's perception. One was shockingly mid-stage and the other late-stage. These 2 were undoubtedly in the same group. There was a high probability that they were also on the way to meet up with their own people. When they passed by this place, they sensed some clues and brazenly attacked. Because at this time, everyone was looking for their companions to meet up. They concluded that this was a gathering point. The cultivators of a certain group had not gathered yet, and with their methods, they might be able to obtain some benefits through a sudden sneak attack. In reality, their deduction was not wrong. If it was really just 2 ordinary mid-stage and 1 early stage gathered here, encountering the 2 of them would probably point to disaster. But among the 3 people gathered here, which one of them was simple? Chu Shen's cultivation was indeed low, but his status was high. Lu Ye's cultivation was not high, but his battle prowess was valiant. Even the invincible Lucky Star, whose true identity was unknown, might not necessarily be a simple Constellation Realm cultivator. Lu Ye's figure had already dashed out, but Chu Shen took out a defensive spiritual treasure, enveloping himself and the Lucky Star. He was prepared to see the situation clearly before making a decision. Suddenly ambushed, his response was undoubtedly very wise. Because he did not know how many enemies there were and what their cultivations were, it also showed his extremely fast reaction speed. However, just as he probed the enemy's situation, violent spiritual power fluctuations erupted in his perception. In the next instant, his vision was filled with an overwhelming number of colorful spirit techniques. Surprisingly, Lu Yi had made a move. The 2 constellations who launched the sneak attack did not expect the enemy to be so bold. Just now, when they noticed the cultivation of Lu Ye's group, they were full of joy, thinking that they had pinched a soft persimmon. They did not expect that Lu Yi, a mid-stage constellation realm cultivator, not only did not show any signs of escaping, but also counterattacked. Looking at the scale and number of spirit techniques, they were both shocked. Because being able to activate so many spirit techniques in a short period of time was not an ability that a mid-stage constellation realm cultivator could possess. Moreover, they could clearly sense that the power of each spirit technique was extremely high. The two of them made a prompt decision and separated. The sky full of spirit techniques blasted out, and the two figures dashed out in a sorry state. Their auras were turbulent, and they had undoubtedly suffered a loss. Chu Shen, who was activating his defensive spiritual treasure, saw this scene and his eyes could not help but light up. When they were suddenly attacked, he thought that this time it boded ill rather than well, but with Lu Ye's counterattack, he clearly sensed Fa Wuzuan's powerful background and suddenly came back to his senses. This battle was not impossible. Raising his hand, he summoned his body-solidifying mirror and urged his spiritual power inside. At the same time, Lucky Star, who was standing next to him, changed her delicate appearance. As her spiritual power surged, her fingernails grew rapidly. In an instant, the 10 fingernails on her 2 hands were half a foot long and shone with a cold light. At first glance, it was as if she had 2 sharp claws in her hands. Her figure swayed, and she had already pounced out, like a fierce beast hunting for food. However, she also knew her own limits, so she did not look for the late-stage constellation realm cultivator, but went for the mid-stage constellation realm cultivator. The two figures fought in an instant, and directly stunned Chu Shun, who was activating the mirror's power, because from the beginning, the Lucky Star gave off a weak feeling, as if she would be blown away by the wind. However, when she really made a move, he realized the ferocity of her fighting style. It was a fighting style that completely disregarded her life. Facing the enemy's attack, she had no intention of dodging at all. It was completely a posture of exchanging life for life. The opponent she found was a weapon cultivator, and the two of them fought in close combat. The battle was extremely fierce, and when her sharp claws collided with the opponent's spiritual treasure, sparks flew everywhere. What made Chu Shen even more dumbfounded was that Lu Yi, who had used a lot of spells to catch the enemy off guard, was now bombarding the other late-stage enemy with spells in an endless stream. The other late-stage enemy was only able to parry and barely had the strength to fight back. In this short period of time, the power of the body solidification mirror in Chu Shen's hand had already been activated, but he did not know which one to attack. Originally, he had planned to attack the late-stage constellation realm cultivator. After all, the latter's cultivation was higher. As long as he dealt with the late-stage constellation realm cultivator, the three of them would have nothing to fear from the remaining mid-stage constellation realm cultivator. However, at this moment, the late-stage constellation realm cultivator was in an extremely difficult situation, and it seemed that they did not need his help at all. On the other hand, although the Lucky Star temporarily gained the upper hand by relying on her reckless fighting style, it might not be able to last long. Moreover, this kind of fighting style could easily put him in danger. With a thought, Chu Shen made a decision. The body solidification mirror's light shot out, instantly enveloping the mid-stage constellation realm cultivator. This person was entangled with the Lucky Star, and had been constantly on guard against Chu Shen's movements. For cultivators with rich battle experience, this kind of treasure with unknown power was the most difficult to guard against. It was only when the treasure's light bloomed that he roughly realized the treasure's effect. He instinctively wanted to dodge, but could not get away at all. In a hurry, he twisted his body, and the treasure's light only covered half of his body. Even so, the mid-stage constellation realm cultivator's body suddenly stiffened. The body solidification mirror's effect, as its name implied, was to freeze a person's body. The essence of that light was actually a kind of invisible field. Once it entered a person's body, it could make a person's body stiffen. Lu Yi had the innate skill tree to burn and refine, so she did not fear this treasure's light. However, the others could not. Even if only half of his body was covered, this person's movements could not be coherent. Taking advantage of this opportunity, the lucky star's sharp claws flashed. It did not know what kind of secret technique it used, but it first broke through this person's protective spiritual energy with one claw, and then pierced through his chest with the other claw. This mid-stage constellation realm cultivator had a pained expression. Although he was unwilling, he still blurted out, "I admit defeat. Spare me." If he did not admit defeat now, he would die. According to the rules of the Constellation Palace battle, if one took the initiative to admit defeat, they would only leave after a breath. A breath's time was not long, but it was enough for a Constellation Realm cultivator to take a person's life. In other words, if the lucky star wanted to, she could completely kill this person. However, this woman was undoubtedly not a bloodthirsty person. After hearing the words "admit defeat," the sharp claws that were about to attack again stopped. She pulled her other claw out of the opponent's chest, and with a burst of blood, she floated back. After a breath, this mid-stage Constellation Realm cultivator's figure suddenly disappeared. The injury was not light, but it was not fatal. For a mid-stage Constellation Realm cultivator, it could be recovered in a day or two. After dealing with this mid-stage Constellation Realm cultivator, Chu Shen hurriedly looked towards the late-stage Constellation Realm cultivator. He once again urged his spiritual energy to pour into the body solidification mirror, ready to lend Lu Yi a hand. However, what shocked him was that Lu Yi did not show any signs of attacking again. The light of the spell slowly faded, and the late-stage Constellation Realm cultivator's figure had long disappeared without a trace. This late-stage Constellation Realm cultivator was actually killed by Fa Wuzuan alone. And it only took a very short time. One had to know that he had joined forces with the Lucky Star, and relied on the power of the body solidification mirror to achieve such a quick result. The opponent was only a mid-stage Constellation Realm cultivator. In comparison, this Fa Wuzuan's strength was somewhat terrifying. End of chapter. Chapter 1409. After a single battle, the two attackers were both eliminated. The two probably didn't expect such a situation, otherwise, they wouldn't have acted so rashly. Chu Shen and Unrivaled Lucky Star didn't say anything, only looking at Lu Yi. Lu Ye's hands were clasped in his wide sleeves. After a moment of silence, he said, "What were we discussing just now?" Chu Shen immediately said, "The discussion was for you to make the decision. I have no problem with it, I will follow your lead. What about you?" He turned to look at Lucky Star. The woman returned to her weak appearance from before. Her long fingernails that were comparable to top-grade spirit treasures were also retracted. She said softly, "I have no problem with it, either of you can make the decision." Chu Shen nodded. "Then it's settled. Brother, just tell us what to do, we will listen to you." Lu Yi said, "You can listen to me, but I hope that the two of you will have a certain degree of trust in me, because no matter what, we will have to work together from now on." "Of course." Chu Shen agreed readily, but no one knew what he was thinking. Lu Yi also knew that it was impossible for everyone to completely trust each other in such a situation. Even if they were on the same team, this was still a temporary cooperation under the rules of Constellation Hall. He pondered for a moment, then continued, "The rules of this battle aren't about who can last until the end, who will gain the most benefits. The biggest deciding factor is the number of enemies eliminated, and the time you can last is only a secondary factor. So even if we can hide until the end, if we can't eliminate enough enemies, we won't gain much. My intention is to take the initiative and eliminate as many enemies as possible. Of course, with the strength of the three of us, if there aren't many enemies, we can definitely fight. But if it's a complete team of 5, it will be difficult to deal with them, and there might even be some risks." As he said this, he took out the newly refined Twin Spirit Connecting Array Disc. "I have a treasure here that can be used here. You can familiarize yourself with it." As he spoke, he activated the power of the Twin Chi Linked Branch Array Disc. In fact, if he wanted to use the Twin Spirit Connection, he didn't need the disc array at all. The original intention of refining the disc array was to make it convenient for others to use. He could casually construct the Twin Spirit Connection, and the effect was almost the same as the disc array. It just needed to be maintained at all times. Lu Yi naturally had his own considerations for taking out the array disk at such a time. As for whether it could proceed smoothly or not, that would depend on the progress of the situation. The instant the formation disk's might was released and enveloped the three of them, Chu Shen and Lucky Star's expressions turned stern. This was because under the envelopment of the formation disk's might, the two of them could roughly sense the powerful foundation in Lu Ye's body. If the power hidden in the body of a typical mid-stage constellation realm cultivator was like a candle flame, then the power in Lu Ye's body was like a bright lamp. What was even more inconceivable to the two of them was that they could clearly sense that the three of them, who had just met each other for the first time, were easily connected to each other under the cover of that inexplicable power. There was not much resistance or disharmony at all. Both of them were greatly shaken, far more so than when they felt Lu Ye's powerful foundation. This was because the power of this treasure was something they had never seen before. It should be known that if the chi dynamics between cultivators could be closely connected, they would be able to smoothly form a formation. Once a formation was formed, they would be able to display abilities that surpassed their own strength. However, it was not easy to form a formation. It required familiar companions and a long period of practice and running in. Connecting with a stranger's chi dynamics for the first time was complete nonsense. Your chi dynamics were cold, and my chi dynamics were gentle. They clashed with each other, so how could they blend and connect with each other? Of course, it could be done with the help of formation talismans. However, formation talismans were precious and consumable treasures. Who would casually use them unless it was a last resort? However, this disk array was clearly not a consumable treasure. It could definitely be used repeatedly. This also meant that this disk array was equivalent to many formation talismans. In comparison, the effect of allowing each other to borrow strength seemed insignificant. The biggest reason why Lu Yi refined this disk array was because it could allow cultivators to connect with their chi dynamics and form a formation at will. Borrowing strength from each other was just another side effect of the disk array. All constellation cultivators had good eyesight. Even the seemingly weak and powerless Lucky Star could see the greatest mystery of the disk array at a glance, let alone someone like Chu Shen who had an extraordinary background. He was young, but he had a sunshine powerhouse as his birth mother. He had seen many treasures and immediately realized the great value of this disk array. He held back for a moment, but couldn't help but ask, "Brother, this thing, what is it called?" Lu Yi looked at him meaningfully. The Twin Chi and Branches Array Disc. Twin Chi linked branches. Chu Shen savored it carefully and exclaimed, "Good name, very suitable for the occasion." With the help of this disk array, even if the three of them were to form a formation, they would still have the strength to fight even if they encountered a complete five-man team. Lu Ye's method of dealing with a late-stage constellation cultivator so quickly proved this point. He also finally understood why Fa Wuzuan suggested to take the initiative to attack. With the help of this disk array, it would be a waste if they only hid. After the discussion, the three of them soared into the sky and formed a simple tripartite formation, each occupying the three positions of heaven, earth, and human. Their auras were brilliant, and they were ostentatious. Since they were taking the initiative to attack, there was naturally no need to hide. They would do it as conspicuously as possible. They weren't afraid of being ambushed, they were only afraid that the enemy wouldn't show up. Lu Yi was the leader, while Chu Shen and Lucky Star were his assistants. In the cultivation world, the strong were respected. This was a deeply ingrained belief. Although Chu Shen admitted that he was not bad, compared to Fa Wuzuan who was at the top of the ranking, there was still a big gap. Low cultivation was after all a shortcoming. In just half an hour, Lu Yi felt the movement of a battle in the distance. According to the information he had, there were at least 3 teams fighting this time. As for whether there were more, he didn't know for now. Although this desolate star was big, it wasn't very big compared to the constellation cultivators. With so many constellation cultivators gathered here, it was inevitable that they would meet, clash, and clash. Since there was a battle, it meant that there were at least 2 teams of cultivators fighting. After a while, as the distance narrowed, Lu Yi saw the situation clearly. It was indeed 2 teams of cultivators fighting, and it was 2 complete teams with a total of 10 people. This meant that there was at least another team on the desolate star. Because the 3 of them had defeated 2 constellation cultivators before, one of the teams had lost 2 people. The battle ahead was very intense, back and forth. The rules of the constellation hall didn't have any obvious explanation, but there were many hidden rules. The biggest feature was relative fairness. In other words, no matter what kind of battle it was, under the operation of the constellation hall's rules, the strength of each side was roughly the same. Take Lu Ye's previous arena battles as an example. At first, he encountered intermediate stage cultivators, but later, the probability of encountering advanced stage cultivators increased. Because he won every battle, although he only had intermediate stage cultivation, the Constellation Hall had already determined that he had the strength of an advanced stage cultivator. They would do their best to arrange advanced stage cultivators as his opponents. Of course, this kind of fairness was only relative. The Constellation Hall couldn't do it perfectly. This kind of fairness was also reflected in the allocation of personnel. For example, the 2 teams fighting at the moment both had body cultivators charging at the front, weapon cultivators assisting in killing the enemy, sword cultivators flying swords like rain, ghost cultivators appearing and disappearing, and Dharma cultivators roaming and casting spells. It could be said that the collision between these 2 complete teams was an extremely standard team cooperation. Each had their own position, and there was a certain degree of cooperation. If Lu Ye's team wasn't missing 2 people, it would definitely be a good team and wouldn't be said to be a misshapen configuration. This kind of battle looked intense, but it was very difficult to achieve anything unless one side took an unconventional move. This was probably the reason why the 2 teams fought in full swing without any losses. Their allocation was similar, and their strength was similar. Naturally, they were evenly matched. The 2 sides fought for an unknown amount of time. When Lu Yi and the other 2's auras entered the vicinity of the battlefield, they were immediately detected by these people. The cultivators of both teams slowed down their movements at the same time and looked over vigilantly. In the cultivation world, it was not uncommon for a sandpiper and clam to fight, and the fishermen would benefit from the fishermen's quarrel. The 2 sides were in an abyss of suffering, so naturally, they had to be on guard against such a thing. However, when they realized that there were only 3 people coming, and that 2 of them were in the middle stage and 1 was in the early stage, they didn't care much. Each of them had a late stage overseer, and all 5 of them were full. No one was afraid of such a disabled team. They naturally thought that the other party was just here to watch the show. However, what shocked all of them was that this team of 3, who had obviously been beaten to a pulp and didn't have much strength, didn't have any intention of stopping. Just like that, they charged straight towards the most intense part of the battlefield. Before they arrived, an overwhelming number of spells had already swept over. The cultivators of both sides were furious. Someone shouted, "How dare you!" This scene was like 2 lions fighting, but suddenly, a rabbit ran in and peed. The lethality wasn't much, but it was extremely insulting. However, an extremely shocking scene appeared. As the violent spells enveloped them, a mid-stage constellation realm cultivator who was the focus of attention actually screamed in pain. The protective spiritual light around him shattered, and blood splattered everywhere as he fell into the air. This guy held on to his last breath and shouted that he admitted defeat. Before he landed, he disappeared. Both sides widened their eyes. Only then did they realize that this pool of urine was very insulting, but its lethality was also not bad. Taking out a mid-stage constellation realm cultivator in one move, this strength was extraordinary. The 2 sides had been fighting here for a long time, and they were evenly matched. There hadn't been any casualties. This disabled team that had inexplicably barged in and killed one of them. What was this? You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.